Let me tell you about John Gotti. This is who he was. And if you hurt anybody close to John that he loved, there was no way he wasn't going to hurt you.
What happened to Frankie, and what influence did that have on your father?
A transit authority cop stops him, he pulls out the gun and kills the cop.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Did Gravano tell you how he became a rat?
You would never call him that to his face. Sammy said, once a mafioso, you're a mafioso for life.
Is he still a mafioso, he thinks? I've never seen anything like this. It was magnificent to watch.
Have you ever seen that recording?
Yeah, I have it, and we used it as evidence in our trial. The United States government is the most powerful entity in the world. Will you agree?
For sure, yeah.
I beat them. They played fair in the first trial. The second trial, now the gloves came off, and they got dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. And this is what they did.
Now, that's a very interesting twist right there.
Once and for all, let's end this madness. This is crazy. I mean, the Gottis are the most tried family in history, and I'm the most tried Gotti.
After 6 to 7 years of speaking with John Gotti Jr.'s camp, he finally agreed to come and do a long-form podcast, and it wasn't 1 hour, not 2, 3.5 hours. On top of that, he brought a folder this big with stack of documents of himself, of Sammy the Bull Gravano. He was not complimentary at all with Sammy the Bull Gravano, and Sammy and I have done many podcasts together, Mafia States of America. I told him about some of the questions. Hey, if you're saying all these bad things about Sammy, why is it that your father put him as an underboss? Isn't that on your father? You have to kind of hear his answer. Then his case about when he met 40 minutes with the feds years ago, he got criticized for meeting with feds and cooperating, and he gave his argument. He showed all the documents on when he did it. You'll be able to decide for yourself. I asked him an interesting question about how his father would have felt about him meeting with the feds when he spoke to them for the 40 minutes. You have to hear the answer he gives. Then there was a couple moments where he got very emotional, and we talked about his youngest brother, Frankie. I asked him about a lot of different folks. John A-Light's name came up. His answer is very surprising. It's not what you would have thought he would have said about him. And many others we talked about, the history, New York today versus the past, the two presidents he was very complimentary about, his family, himself, what he's doing now since he's been out for 15 years, how aggressively negative and critical he was about the U.S. government and the RICO system. We talked about that a lot. Anyways, it'll be a historic type of a interview where when I mean historic, if you've been watching the other interviews in the past of the mobsters I've had on, Michael Francis, Sammy Frank Collada, Oscar Goodman, Phil Leonetti, Ralph Natal, there's a lot of them. You're definitely going to love this. But if you're somebody that's also a person who fancies with movies like Godfather or Goodfellas or Power Plays or Strategies or Communication, he's going to make a case to you where for the last 2 hours, you're going to think you're sitting down with a lawyer making an argument. The question is, do you buy it or do you find some leaks in his argument? You will be the judge of that. Having said that, here's my 3.5-hour sit down with John Gotti Jr.
30 seconds.
Did you ever think you would make it? I feel I'm so close I could taste sweet victory. I know this life meant for me. Yeah, why would you bet on Goliath when we got Bet David? Valuetainment, giving values contagious. This world of entrepreneurs, we get no value to haters. How they run, homie, look what I become. I'm the one.
So the history of America is filled with a lot of different last names. If your name is Kennedy, you're going to be tied to the Kennedy family. You got Trumps, you got Bush, you got Rockefeller. But when it comes down to this last name and first name, you know where it goes, and it's John Gotti. And today, after I think 6 years of us trying to do this interview,
7.
Is it 7 years?
7 years.
We're finally doing this, John.
Yeah, at the fight.
This is at the fight.
At my son Johnny's fight.
At the fight. That's right. Good memory. Yes, at the fight.
His pro debut.
I remember that. Yeah. And I had something going. I don't know what it was. I'm like, he was talking to Chris. But it's great to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you.
It's an honor to be here.
Yes, likewise. And for me, when I accidentally got into this world of interviewing,
right.
the world and different folks, and it was always, Pat, you got to get John. You got to get John. You got to get John. I'm like, look, we got to figure out a way to make this work. And I'm glad we finally did. I got so many things I want to talk to you about. I mean, your history, family, things that are going on today, things that are going on both politically, how some things are legal today that used to be illegal, with some of the stuff that the Life was doing. But starters, just very basic question before we get into the story. John, how much of the Life still exists today? Like, are they still acting like active gangsters, mobsters in America?
You know, I'm so far removed. I'm about 26 years removed from that life. I'm only 15 years removed from prison. So you're incorporated when you're in prison. You're on the compound. You're doing time with a lot of fellas from the streets. You have to understand what RICO did to understand where the status of where that lifestyle is today. Okay, RICO was a law that was basically constructed, sort of in the beginning as a civil law. It was good, and it's Robert Blakey. He's a Notre Dame law professor. He constructed the law to be used civilly at first, and then he slowly evolved it to use it in the criminal aspect. And civilly in 1970, I believe it was first introduced as a law, if my memory serves me right. And then by 1979, I want to say, 1979 into 1980, they made 2 criminal indictments. I believe those were the first 2 criminal indictments. One was against a guy named Funzo Altieri, Frank Thierry, who they accused of being the leader of the West Side, the Genovese family. And again, when I say the names of families, these are names that the government and the media had established. I don't know these names. They know these names. They establish them for the press, and they identify various names. But he was accused of being the shot caller for that group. And then you had a guy named Tony Provenzano, who was the union leader, the Teamsters union leader, that was always adverse and at loggerheads with Jimmy Hoffa out of New Jersey. So they were respectively in 79, 80, 2 indictments came about.
Tony Provenzano?
Tony Provenzano, yep. And he died while in prison. They both were convicted of RICO. Now, I remember driving in a car with my dad, and my father saying to me, he had said that in 79, he came home in 77. Did the state bid, he came home in 77 August, and we're driving in the car, and he heard it on 1010 Wins News. My father used to always put on 1010 Wins News. That's always was in his car. And if he went to music, it would be Jimmy Roselli or Engelbert Humperdinck. But he had 1010 Wins News on. And when it came over the radio about the first conviction, and again, my memory doesn't serve me correct which one fell first. I want to say Tony Provenzano, that he fell first. Indictments, like I said, were within a year. My father said, that's the beginning of the end. I remember him turning to me and saying, and I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't quite, because I'm in military school at the time. I was a bit naive to certain things.
But at this point, you already know how Dad makes money.
Well, you know what? You pretty much understand when you come from Howard Beach, and the only way I can really closely make the public understand it, you have to make a correlation. And the correlation would be, you ever seen the movie The Town?
Of course.
Okay, with Ben Affleck?
Great movie.
Great movie.
It's the famous line, right?
Well, I was away with a lot of those guys. A lot of those guys I was in Raybrook with, all good, solid kids, Irish kids. They had lived in that conclave there. You couldn't, there's only one way in, one way out. How they used to pinch those kids when they used to do a score is they block the bridge and get them every time coming back one way or the other. Wow. Well, Howard Beach is very similar. There's only 2 ways. One way in, of course, Bay Boulevard, and the back way dumping into Brooklyn. Close-knit, everybody's the same. More than not, people will like my father. I wasn't unique that my father was in prison. My next-door neighbor's father was in prison, or uncle or cousin or somebody else was in prison for similar situations. They were all part of the street element. So really, if you were Italian-American and you lived there, you were more so inclined to know or be a part of that life or have relationships than not. If the answer would be not, then you were the odd duck. You were the exception, I was the rule. Okay? You would be the exception and I would be the rule. So if you were that guy that didn't really know any better or didn't have a friend or didn't know somebody that was in the street life, you were the exception. Because the rule was we all knew each other. We were real tight there, and you couldn't come in or out without us knowing about it, and that's basically the way it went down. So at that point, you're growing up, you get an understanding. Your father's a bit different. He used to list on his taxes, he's a professional gambler. I just scratched my head, what exactly is a professional gambler? I'm not quite sure, And my mother always was that, solid rah-rah person in his corner. She adored my father, never asked questions, but P.S., she would stand up, she'd go nose to nose with him if she had to, or if someone, God forbid, would say something negative about my father, she would take you to task. She would tighten your ass up really quick, my mother. So she didn't ask, we couldn't get those. If I was a kid and I was inquisitive and I would want to ask that question to my mother, she would say, your father provides very well for us. That would be the response. So you'd have to go out into the streets to learn about what's going on, what time it really is.
Did she grow up in the same streets? Like, did they meet?
No. Well, it's a great story. My mother's from Long Island City. My father's a Brooklyn guy, okay? Originally from the Bronx, evolved from the Bronx, but raised in Brownsville, East New York, Brooklyn area, okay? Home of Murder Incorporated. Albert Anastasia was his idol growing up. And they had met one day. My mother was 17 years old, and she was applying for a barmaid job. She was in Brooklyn, hitting the circuit, trying to get a barmaid job, and she was being harassed by a guy who followed her out of one of the interviews. So she looked into a bar, and she seen a group of gentlemen sitting at the end of the bar, opened the door and walked in, and she says, excuse me. She said, do you mind I sit here? This guy's bothering me. Some guy's bothering me. My father's sitting there. He's a 19-year-old young punk, if you want to say it, okay, with a three-quarter leather jacket. He's sitting there, the hair's slicked back. He says, who's bothering you? And she says, well, no, this guy's he's just following me, and I just feel very uncomfortable. He says, sit right over here. The guy opens the bar door and looks in, sees my mother sitting with my father at the bar, and just turns, and my father shoots him a look, and he just runs out. And they began to talk at that point. She was 17, he was 19. They moved in together a short time later, and they were never separated.
Wow.
Prison only separated them. Only prison separated them.
Wow. So when she, like, at what point did she know, I mean, even if you know some of these stories, at what point did she know how he provides?
His friends. You go into the Copacabana.
Yeah.
Okay, you go to, and that's where my father would take my mother. As his girlfriend, as his bride, as his wife, constant companion was Angelo Ruggiero, who was my father's boyhood friend since they were 10 years old. My Aunt Marie, my Uncle Angelo's wife, became very close to my mother. You'd see the characters there. You knew exactly what you were dealing with when you walked into Copacabana. You knew you weren't at the Friars Club.
So she kind of got an idea. She's like, I'm...
Very intelligent woman, my mother, very perceptive. She understood what time it was.
Now, let me ask you, is the culture of when you get into it, because when my wife and I were getting ready to get married, I told her, I said, listen, I don't know what you're looking for for a husband.
Right.
I'm going to be running, gunning, and this is going to be the life. Are you okay with it?
Yeah.
Did they have that conversation or no? It's just...
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it reminds me of a story years later. My mother would get a little, when things really got complicated, and this is like 1985, things got really complicated. And he became now, my father was a local hero, local celebrity in Howard Beach, Brooklyn, in the boroughs, but nobody knew him. He was a local guy. There was a news story I remember when I was in military school about the Garment Center, and it was the first time I ever seen my father on TV. I had seen him on TV, and that was like 1980, 81 that this flashed on. But now, 85, he was basically pushed onto the world stage. The media made him created this Dapper Don situation, this character they created. And it became very complicated life at that point. Everywhere now we had to be, on our guard, basically. And my mother, at some point, post 85, my father got pinched in 86. He went back in. They remanded his bail. He was indicted on the 80, and he was indicted in March of 85 on a racketeering case, which he was the first to beat any of the RICO cases. And he was remanded, his bail was remanded in 86, April, I believe. Frankie Chico was killed in a car bomb. And a short time later, they had a hearing, and they decided to take my father off the street in 86. He came home, we beat the case, first one to win the RICOs. Everybody fell. Commission case.
Why is that? Why did he beat him? Is it a lawyer? Is it fear? Is it connection?
Well, the government would want you to believe that my father fixed the case, okay? And they actually, through that Gravano character, they said that they got to a juror. Now, let's be a devil's advocate. Let's say Gravano was correct. Let's say it did happen. Let's say he got to the juror. What about the other 11? They didn't exist? There's 12 juries. Last I remember, in a felony federal case in America, I've tried many, there's 12 jurors that decide your fate. So let's pretend that John Gotti did get to that juror. Let's pretend, okay? What about the other 11 jurors that voted not guilty? Okay? They all had their own mindsets. So all 12 across the board voted not guilty, and John was the first one. And you're asking me why do I believe he won the case? I'm going to tell you why. Bruce Cutler, at that time, the case started out with Neil Delacroce as the lead defendant, and John Gotti, my father, was accused of being a captain under Neil, and he was the second defendant, and then they had 7 more co-defendants right on down the line, including my Uncle Gene. And the lead attorney was Barry Slotnick on that case. Barry Slotnick represented Neil Delacroce, and Bruce Cutler, who was a disciple, was under Barry Slotnick, took my father as the second seed. Once Neil Delacroce died of cancer, Barry Slotnick thought he was going to take my father as the lead defendant. My father says, no. I came to the dance with Bruce. Bruce is going to stay right here. And that was the creation. And what we got to see, Pat, was an evolution of 2 individuals. I've never seen anything like this. It was magnificent to watch. Okay? Bruce Cutler, here's a guy that his father, Murray, was a NYPD police officer, became an attorney. Bruce Cutler was a prosecutor out of the Brooklyn DA's office, someone that John Gotti would hate. He would hate any prosecutor, and he would hate his father for being a cop. Okay, my father would, on the norm, would say, I wouldn't even talk to you. You're a prosecutor, and your father was a cop. Hit the bricks. But that was the lawyer, that was the structure that when Neil got the case, Barry Slotnick came on board. My father was assigned Brucey. But they developed an amazing rapport, and I saw Bruce evolve almost into an alter ego of John Gotti's. And he had the balls to stand up and actually perform, to go against the government, to say exactly what he felt, to take the indictment that was trash, that was so ill-prepared, to throw it into the garbage pan and say this is rancid, and the jurors watched his theatrics. They were won over. They saw how John Gotti composed himself. They saw how he comported himself. And I think a lot of them began to fall slightly in love with him, or, evolve to liking his character and how, the humor. One of the co-defendants was a gentleman named Lenny DiMaria. Very funny, very witty guy. Like, he would say little jokes in between, little quips in between. And I think it was the combination, the chemistry of those individuals that were on trial that won that jury over. The chemistry of those, along with Bruce Cutler and these personality of lawyers, the Santangelo brothers, Richie Raybach, and so on, the personality of those attorneys on that case, I believe that's what won the day.
Now, you're born 64. That's 86. So you're 22 when this is happening. So you're there every day. You're watching the whole
Well, the trial
thing.
was 87. The trial started 86.
Okay.
And the culmination, it ended in March of 87.
When he beat it. When he beat
yes.
RICO.
Yes.
This has never happened before.
Never happened.
Okay, so when that happened, did other made men or whoever, were they sitting there saying, who's the lawyer you used? Yeah. We can beat these guys. Let's use the same method. Is that kind of what became the model?
Bruce became a very sought-after attorney at that point because he was nobody. He was an unknown attorney at that point. He was basically a second seat to Barry Slotnick, who was a very well-known attorney. But Brucey was like a newly anointed, one of those assistants that would come in, that you'd throw him on a case with you. And a lot of times what the lawyers did, they were cute. So what they would do is they would say, they couldn't wait for a bunch of guys for a big indictment. One of these groups get indicted, 12 guys, 13 guys. And if they knew, for example, like Barry Slotnick knew he had Neil Delacroce, he would come with 2 or 3 of his lawyers and say, hey, Neil, let's put this one with John Gotti, let's put this one with this one. So he'd get more money, they'd get more work for his firm, and they would have the case on lockdown. They'd have the case on lockdown. So, yeah, that was normally what would happen there.
In 85, 86, is Roy Cohn, does he still carry the same kind of weight? Or
I think he died by then. He died of AIDS by then.
Did he die in 86? What year did he die?
I think maybe 84. Early 80s. He contracted AIDS and he died young.
But can you pull up what year was it? 86. So
86 he died.
But at that time, he's no longer as active, right? He had already slowed down did he still carry
He wasn't practicing anymore. And I know for a fact that 86, 85, he was no longer practicing. He was very sick. He was deathly ill.
At what point would you say, did you ever have a chance to meet Roy or no?
I did briefly in Manhattan one night at Harry's Bar in the Helmsley Palace. Yeah.
What year was that?
That was 83, I want to say.
Oh, so that's 3 years before he died. So was he already sick and was he already going through it or no?
Somewhat.
Okay.
Somewhat.
What did your dad think about him?
He used to often tell the story in the difference between when he would try to lecture me, if I had a comfort level and I had a case, because my first trial, I was 22 years old. It was 87, my first trial. And when my father was on trial, he beat in March. I beat my case in June. So we were basically on trial together, my father. He was in the fed court. I was in the state system on trial. So I was comfortable with an attorney named Mike Coro. And he was the go-to guy from Queens by us. And he was like almost like a family to us, very close to my father, my uncles, and everybody else. So I told my dad, with my case, I said, Dad, I want to go with Mike Coro. And he says, no, I got the lawyer for you. You're going to go with this attorney right here. And I said, but I'm comfortable. He says, look, listen to me, kid. He said, let me explain a story to you. And he told me that when he got indicted on the McBratney case, okay, and this is a case that there were multiple eyewitnesses. McBratney, I don't know if you're familiar with the case, McBratney was the leader of an Irish crew that were kidnapping Italian bookmakers and Italian money guys and holding for ransom. And ultimately, they kidnapped a guy named Manny Gambino, a relative of Carl Gambino's, okay? And I believe a ransom was paid, if I understood the story correctly, and they killed him anyway. So at that point, there was a search and destroy mission, whereas that each group put together 3 different individuals to hunt down this Irish crew and wipe them out and kill them all. And my father was very successful, and the last one was the leader, was his name was McBratney, James McBratney. He was the last one to be tracked down and killed. And on that case, there was a barmaid as a witness. There were patrons in the bar that were witnesses. Tough case to beat. He was a fugitive. He went on a lam, and he was tricked into coming in, my father, by a cooperator. He saved his life. And meanwhile, years later, the guy was he was a co-defendant in my dad's 85 case, but he was exposed as a cooperator. Tricked to coming in. He was pinched at that meeting, and then he had to stand trial for the McBratney killing. So at that point, a move is made. Carl Gambino and Neil Delacroce move aside Mike Coro, and Roy Cohn steps in. Now, my father telling the story that Mike Coro's sitting there, and he's almost pleading with the judge to try to get a delay in the case. And I'm sitting there, my father's standing, and Mike's sitting there, and the judge is showing him no respect at all. He's showing him absolutely no respect at all. Like, no. He says, John, on cue, the doors burst open, and Roy Cohn, this little diminutive man, walks in, and he's not even paying attention. It's like he's aloof. His glasses are down, he's reading something, he's just like walking by, and people are trying to say hello, and he's not even acknowledging them. He's just walking right past them. Like, yeah, he's walking right by, okay? And he gets to the front, and he says, how are you, Your Honor? He says, Roy Cohn here for John Gotti. My father's looking. He don't know Roy Cohn. He's looking at him. Mike Coro's my lawyer, you know? And he's saying, well, Mike, so no. So Mike's whispering to Roy, and Roy tells him, shh, sit down. And he sits down.
You got to be kidding me.
Sit down. And he says, Your Honor, we're asking for an extension here. And he says, John, the whole vibe in the courtroom changed. Everything completely changed. Like that. The judge gave the extension. Next thing you know, he negotiated the plea. 7 years, multiple witnesses. He was accused of murder. 7 years. I had to do 3 years on this. I do that standing on my head in the box, he said. 3 years he did, and Roy orchestrated that plea. So,
wow.
Talk about power.
Is that the first time you met him?
No, my father met him for the first time.
That's
yes.
the first time your father met him?
Yeah, I've never met him. I met him later on in life.
83, right.
Up until that point.
So at this point, when he just walks in,
right,
he has no idea he's going to walk in.
No idea.
But he knows who he is. Or he does.
He knows who he is. He knows he did a lot of
reputation.
Work. He did a lot of work for Carl. He did a lot of work for Neil. But he knew of him, never met him.
Did you watch the recent movie that came out called The Apprentice? The story of Trump?
No.
Because he's the main character in the movie that makes it.
Right.
What was his business model for having the kind of power that he had? Was it the OG blackmail business model? Is that what he had?
It goes back to McCarthyism. I mean, he was powerful back then. Senator McCarthy, when he saw something, he saw a quality in this young Roy Cohn. And again, I've never watched anything on Roy Cohn, but it's an observation that you make when you're reading books and things of that nature. Having only met him one time, and bits and pieces of tidbits of stories that my father had told me, that there was a persona there. He was sort of identified as the prince of the Velvet Mafia. And you know what the Velvet Mafia was? Velvet Mafia was the underground of New York, the gay community, that these guys had a lot of powerful, influential people were there, and Roy knew everything. Roy knew all the bodies were buried. He knew who was who and what was what, okay? He knew what high-ranking individuals, what judges, everybody played a different role.
The Velvet Mafia.
That's what we used to call them back in the day.
Velvet Mafia. Gay men who helped.
Here you go.
Shape music.
I've never even seen this before.
That's wild. The Velvet Mafia.
Yeah. So
is it like when you say what they knew, the bodies were buried? Is it like they knew who liked men and they knew who came to those parties?
Yeah, it's today. Wow. Today, you and I, society, we accept everything. We accept if you're a good person, you're a good person. Whatever your choices are, okay. Then they did not. Then in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they discriminated against people. It could not happen. So it was like almost a sin to be gay back then, okay? Because society was harsh on that. Okay? Religion was harsh on that. Well, Roy was that, and he was the guy who knew all the secrets and all the answers. And understanding also, this is even before that point of the Velvet Mafia in the 60s into the 70s. Remember, he was a powerful attorney that in his own right won a string of cases. McCarthy saw him and wanted this kid. He wanted this young guy, this brash young gentleman. He wanted him next to him, guide him on the law. And then they began to go through the blacklisting of Hollywood and the communism trials and all that other stuff. And that was the McCarthyism, the era of McCarthyism. That was the beginning of it. His power with the Senate, it only grew. And then it evolved into what you see, the Velvet Mafia.
Wow. Did your dad ever tell you a story about a time that somebody wanted to kill him and take him out? Because that's too much power.
Roy? I've never heard that, no.
Okay. No. Yeah, because you think about having, and by the way.
I would think the government, if anybody, when you say somebody would want to kill him, I would probably say, if you see what's going on today now, like with this P. Diddy trial and Jeffrey Epstein,
sure.
when he hung himself, okay?
Allegedly.
Yeah, well, I was in that unit. It's pretty tough that all the cameras failed. But anyway, that being said, when you see today, when people have that kind of information, when they possess that wealth of information on other powerful individuals, sometimes you outlive your useful purpose and you become expendable. And Roy Cohn was a very powerful individual that knew a lot on a lot of different people. So, maybe AIDS did them a favor, did some powerful individuals a favor, but I don't know if someone would have wanted to kill him. If anybody would want to kill him, I would believe maybe it'd be somebody within the government or some high executive in some big business. It's only speculation
sure,
on my part,
yeah.
But in speculating, I would believe that would be the case.
Wow. So he was hated more by the government than by the mob. He was actually friendly with the mob.
Oh, sure. Well, why would the mob? Why would the street element hate him? Why? If you were friendly with, say, for example, Carlo, okay, and other individuals, okay, and you were there, you were ready to do your job. You were ready when you were called. You came in and you produced these remarkable results. I would embrace you. I don't care what you did. As long as you could achieve the results that we need to accomplish our objective, you're okay by me. So I would say that if anybody would want to have hurt Roy Cohn, it would have been probably either a governmental aspect, element, or it would have been maybe an executive of some big company, or maybe in Hollywood, where a lot of them were persecuted. These were very powerful men with a lot of money. And he began with him and Senator McCarthy, destroyed a lot of careers. I mean, you're talking about boatloads of money sailed out as a result of these guys getting blacklisted, couldn't produce movies, actors on the shelf for life.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, when you hear stories about this guy, there's so many documentaries on him and interesting books on him. He is he's a very unique character.
Yeah,
very interesting to read about. Going back, John, I think
I'm going to be sure to watch that.
I think it'll be entertaining, especially for you to watch.
Absolutely.
Going back to when I go through the story, and I think about the young John yourself with your father.
Right.
Is it true that the first time you met your father, you were 8 years old?
No, that's not true.
Because he was gone for a few years. What was it?
Well, always met my father. I used to visit my father.
Meaning he was in jail. Did you guys go visit or no?
My first birthday, my father was doing a year in Riverhead. He was doing a larceny bid in, I think, auto theft bid, rather, in Riverhead. He did a year there. That was my first birthday. He was there. And then he came home for a brief amount of time. And then he went back in 1968. he got the hijacking charge. So I was 4 years old at that time. He went in and did, he came out in 72. So he did 4 years on the hijacking charge. So if you want to, he came home in March of 72. So that would make me just 8 years old. So most of my life, young life, my father was in prison. But like I said, I mean, I visited him regularly. My mother was dutiful. She was loyal. She always took us. She would pile us in the car. And my grandfather, one of my uncles, would drive us to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. We'd pile in the visiting room. In fact, I've got, I still have several in my book, Shadow of My Father. I have a picture of me as a little buck in the visiting room with my father. He's in the
How often would you guys go visit?
Well, again, it's not like today. It's easy. It was far more accessible today. But back then, my mother would probably go every 2 or 3 months. We would go. She'd break the kids up. It was hard to take us all. So maybe I seen my father in the course of a year. I'd see him 3 times, maybe, possibly 4.
In your first 8 years, how long was he out?
First 8 years, we got 1, 4, 5. I want to say in and out. I would say by the time I was, I say this, by the time I was 13, he had 9 in. So first 8 years, let's say 5. But by the time I was 13, he had 9 in.
So 13 years old, he's only been with you for 4 years in the house, where you come home, you see him.
Yeah.
Got it. And then at this point, you still don't know what he's doing. You don't know what business he's in.
He's different. He's different. He's absolutely different. Look, I mean, he walked different. He talked different. And it was remarkable. Because I used to, as I got older, I would watch my father and I would be in amazement. Like we would, we'll discuss that maybe a little bit later about the evolution of what he became. But at that point in my life, you look at him and you say to yourself, I know this much. I know I played Little League Baseball and I know my coach. I know my kids on the block, their fathers, who's a blue-collar worker, hard-working individual, whatever have you. I know how they've all comported themselves. Everybody spoke Brooklynese. We all similarly spoke. But John was different. The first day he came home, when he came home from Lewisburg, he was different. Brown Lincoln Continental. That's what he came home. He had a chocolate brown Lincoln Continental. The car pulls down the block, pulls in his driveway. We live in a row of row houses. Second off the corner, little green awning, simple house. And he gets out of the car. He's got a light brown mock neck, chocolate brown suit with a matching overcoat. And he gets out of the car with jet black hair. And I've described it in my book. It was Tony Curtis with muscles. He came out of the car and he looked and he just surveyed the area. He got out of the car. He shot his jacket. He fixed it, looked down. He saw him. I waved to him. And he just walked like he owned the place. Like he never saw the house before because we moved there from South Brooklyn when he went to prison. So he found the house okay. He drove himself home, found it, parked his car, saw me, walked up the stairs like he always was there, like he owned the place, literally, so to speak. So in watching him and watching his mannerisms, watching how my mother deferred to him, look, he was different than my friends' fathers, that's for sure. That much I did know. So that's the foundation. And then as you get a little older, also, Pat, you become more perceptive, okay? People gossip and say, your father's in prison. No, my father's not in prison. My father's at a military camp, and he's in a construction aspect. They have to build things there. Oh, yeah? Okay. And then you evolve more and more, you become more and more.
When was the first time you realized he is really in prison? How old were you?
I would probably say, maybe it struck me as a little odd, when I was 8 years old.
At 8 years old, got it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a Santa Claus element, right?
7 years old, and 8. I turned 8 in February of 72. He came home in March. Right around that time, you understand because he's coming home. And you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Listen, we don't give kids credit. The kids today are a lot smarter than we were because they're stimulated by computers and everything else, and far more in interaction in that respect. But they don't have the personal skills that we have in personal interaction. But they're literate. They read so much. They can hit a button, true or not true, and they can find almost anything they want to find. But you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and you come to an understanding that everything's a little different here.
That makes sense because even back, there's not internet. It's not like you're on TikTok. John Gotti, is back in You don't have access to that, right? You're living in this community.
No, then you either in the newspapers or it's like word of mouth. That's it.
Now
Pony Express.
You go to military academy,
right?
And your is it 79 when you go? I think 79 when you go.
78 to 82, I was there.
Right. So when you go there, what's the story where you're sitting there and there comes a story on TV?
Right.
You know, John Gotti, and everybody's watching. Like, wait a minute. What was that story when that happened?
I was in the day room. and we had a TV. The TV was in the day room. So when we had some downtime, we weren't drilling, whatever have you, or playing sports, you go to the day room, watch TV. And I'm watching, and it was like an undercover operation. They're talking about the garment center. And it had a picture of my father with a gray sport jacket on, and he had a bandage on his hand, because he was here in Florida, and he knocked the biker out at a red light. So I remember that when that happened, he had a chipped tooth in his hand, got infected. So you'll see that surveillance, you'll see him with a gray sport jacket on or a gray silk shirt, and he's talking to, if I remember correctly, he's talking to Alphonse, a guy named Funzy Siska, in front of the Ravenite, and he's got his hand like this, and he's talking, and you see his hands bandaged up. And that was the same exact time. They showed that picture, and this is, let's say 81. I mean, I could be off slightly on my dates. I'm trying to piece together in my head, 81. And it said, this man, John Gotti, is a captain in so-and-so Gambino crime family, and the garment center is controlled by Tommy Gambino and all these players. And I'm looking, and I see I'm sitting in the back watching the TV. And all of a sudden, I'm like sweating a little bit, like I'm getting nervous. Like, you know, my sphincters tighten up now. I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, shit, I'm getting very uncomfortable. And all of a sudden, in the front row, and they're like talking to each other, and they all turn, and they're looking at me now. And he's got the same name as you. I says, yeah, sure does, yeah. The other guy says, another one of the cadets says, oh, I saw him here. Gotti, he was here with you 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's my father. And all of a sudden, everybody got quiet. You know, everybody got quiet and they're watching the TV. And I'm like, oh, God, please. Like, I'm counting the seconds till this ends. This program's got to end now. Wow. You know, I'm counting the seconds here. And that was really like, now I became educated, okay, so to speak. Now you're educated, okay? That's the point where you become educated.
Yeah, when I try to, you know, over the years, when you read about your father.
Right.
So many different stories written about him, right? Persona, personality, King of New York, all this stuff, you know, all these great nicknames that he has. But at some point, you know, something happens where the level of rage can go to a whole different level for different people. For me, one day my dad and I are sitting down and we're having a conversation. He's watching all these mob interviews. He says, what do you think about these guys? They did this and they did that and they killed and they did this. And I say, yeah, I mean, that's the life they were raised in. He says, well, you know, I could never kill anybody. I could never do this. I could never do that. I'm like, look, at the time he had only one grandkid and Grace. I said, what would you do? What are you capable of if somebody does something to your granddaughter? You just see my dad, like, you know, suddenly gets the rage going, right? And he says, I'd be capable of doing anything to protect my granddaughter. I said, totally right. The story with Joseph Kennedy for me is one of the guys I really like to study on because he's the guy that could have been a gangster. Some say he was a gangster. For him to be able to build a family.
Talk about the father or son?
The father, Joseph Kennedy, the OG.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the father, he was a bootlegger.
That's right. I mean, he was, you know, later on he became the, you know, chairman of SEC, and I think it was all these different things that he did.
Yeah.
But something happened to him when his oldest son died, right? When that took place. It changed him.
Absolutely.
The story about I think it's your younger brother.
My brother,
right?
Frankie boy, yeah.
Frankie. What happened to Frankie, and what influence did that have on your father?
Well, you know, look, I mean, at that point in our lives, I'm sure my father experienced a lot of losses in his life, meeting friends and whatnot, but we've never experienced something so close to home. So he was away a good portion of Frankie boy's life. Nevertheless, he was like the apple of his eye. He really was. Frankie was a good kid. He's a chubby kid with curly hair, you know, cherub face, his little cherub face. What bothered him the most, well, naturally he lost his son, but that particular day, Frankie was a tough kid. He was always fighting in school, always getting in trouble. So finally my father had enough. He used to call my mother Butch. It was a nickname for my mother. He said, Butch, Go get this kid and bring him home right now. She went and got my brother Frankie, and I was away at military school at the time. She brings him in the house. She tells my father. My mother would take a beating for us if she had to. She was fiercely loyal to her kids. She says, Johnny, I'm telling you right now, don't put your hands on him. Keep your mouth shut. Go get him. Walks in the house, and as soon as he comes in the house, and he had it with Frankie, and he gives him an ass whipping.
Are you there? You're seeing this?
No, I'm in military school. I'm away.
Got it.
I heard afterwards, and that's just where my father it ate him up. It completely ate him up because he never put his hands on Frankie, but he had enough. That's it. He says, this kid needs... My father was raised in a house where his father used to beat him just to let him know he was there, okay? So, but yet he showed a lot of restraint and hit his own kids. If my father gave me 5 beatings in my life, I probably deserved 15, okay? He showed a lot of restraint in his own children, okay? Never hit my sisters, never would raise his hands. And Frankie boy, you know, he was the younger than I was. He wasn't the fifth. My brother Peter's the fifth, but Frankie boy was sort of like treated like almost like the baby there. And he gave him this beating, and that was it. He told him, "That's it. Up to your room. You're punished. That's it." Blah blah blah. And he told my mother, "He's not to leave this house. You understand me? He don't leave this goddamn house. That's it." And my father leaves. Well, Frankie sneaks out of the house and meets up with some friends. Goes on a mini bike. And gets hit by a car and gets killed.
I didn't know that story,
Yeah,
John.
that's what happened. So he came off the Belt Parkway, and the sun was low, and the car nailed him, hit him, dragged him about several hundred feet. He was stuck under the car, actually. And, it was, my mother got the call, and she raced barefoot 3 blocks down to where this happened, and she saw him in the street.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
When did you hear about it? When did they call you?
My father sent the car up to come get me at military school, and they came to my room. They told me that put your service uniform on, and someone's coming to pick you up. Someone's coming to pick me up, put my service uniform on. This didn't make any sense. So we don't know anything else. So I had to go to my quarters, put my service uniform on, my white gloves, my hat, and I went and I waited. I sat there and waited. Car pulls up. And driving the car was a gentleman who did time with my father in Lewisburg. His name was Charlie DeCanio. And another gentleman named Mark. He recently died in prison. They picked me up, got in the car. They wouldn't say anything. They wouldn't talk. They were very somber. And like Mark was sort of like holding back from crying. So I'm saying something ain't right here. I'm not asking any questions. I'm figuring maybe something happened to my father. I don't know. And then we get home, I pull in front of the house, they tell me, wait here. I see everybody by my house. A lot of people there. They both get out of the car, and I'm in the car by myself now, in the back seat. Wait here, I can't get out and go in my own house. And I'm sitting there, I'm fidgeting in the car, and I'm saying, all of a sudden I see my father walk out, I went, he's okay. What could this be all about? Never hit me. And he takes me out of the car, takes me for a walk, he says, your brother's gone.
He told you this?
Yeah, did.
Man, I am so sorry. I did not know this whole story. Yeah. Wow. And at this point, while this is taking place, it's holy moly.
Yeah. It was, you sort of think to yourself, you say, maybe if I didn't go away to school and I was here, it wouldn't have happened. So for several years, I beat myself up over that. But I know my father most certainly beat himself up over it. And he would never show that emotion. My father was a true soldier. He sat for 3 days. We had Frankie's wake for 3 days. 3 days, he postured by that coffin, and he greeted people from all over. They came from Buffalo, from Pennsylvania. They came from all over. And he greeted everybody, and he'd walk them over and show them his son, brush his hair back. And he kept it all together. I couldn't keep it together.
Oh, my God, no way.
I couldn't keep it together. But when he had his own quiet time, when he had his own time, that's when he would mourn. You'd hear him at night. He'd mourn.
You ever saw him in front of you, like when he never showed it in front of you?
Never one time. He wouldn't show me that weakness. He wouldn't show anybody that weakness. He wouldn't do it. Just wouldn't do it. He would do it. My bedroom was attached to his den. So the vent was right there. It was a thin wall that detached. So where my bed was, there was a vent to the right side of my bed, And that's where the couches were, and there was a fireplace in his den. And I would hear him. I'd hear my father. He would mourn on his own terms to himself.
How did that change him? Like, how did you see that change him?
You know, he was a strong guy. It changed my mother forever. She's still not well today. She's still not right today. I mean, she often drifts back to Frankie Boy all the time. She's still in the same house. She won't change his room. She's never going to move on. I ask her to, you know, Ma, move out to the island with us, get rid of the house, stay with us. No. She says, my son's in this house. I still hear my husband come up the stairs at night.
Wow.
I'm staying here. This is my house.
Frankie's room is still the same. So my mother, it had this profound effect on her that she never recovered from. She still, you know, Frankie's dead 44 years, and she never recovered from it. But my father, you know, he was a soldier. When we had the opportunity, when he was in Marion, Illinois, which was the only level 6 prison in the country, when he was in deadlock, we weren't allowed to touch. So we had a plexiglass between us. And you had to pick up a phone to talk. Mm-hmm. That's your visit. Mm-hmm. So for 7.5 years, that's how I visited my father. And he'd come down, and he'd be shackled up and unchained and put in this locked area, and then he'd pick up the phone and we would talk. That's how. And at times, he would, you know, drift back and talk about Frankie Boy, and you'd see. That's when his eyes would change, his facial expressions would change. But he was a soldier. He was a tough guy. He kept it right here. He knew exactly how to control his emotions. And he had the same expectation from me. And back then, I couldn't do it. And still now, talking about it, I get emotional. My brother and I, we shared the same bed. So I still can't. I'm not him. But he had that ability. Is it when that took place, and I'm wondering, like, is that what did anything about his temperament, rage, anything change? And I've read a lot of different things about the story of the individual. Was it intentional? Was it accidental? Did you ever get to the bottom of what this accident?
You know, I don't know all the particulars. There were stories that the guy was drunk. I don't know. I mean, again, you know, I'm limited in my knowledge and what I would want to look at. I did know this. They lived around the corner. I was friends with his son. I liked the family. I did. So 2 families got torn apart. You know, he ended up missing sometime later. And I don't know all those particulars. But if we would say that Frankie's death would sort of make my father into a different character, or as you say, there's a rage aspect there. No. Let me tell you about John Gotti. This is who he was. John Gotti was a guy that when he loved you to a fault. He used to say it all the time. John, you know me. I have a tough time showing people the door, John, even when they're wrong. Okay? He loved you to a fault. However, if you got on his wrong side, you had a problem. And if you hurt anybody close to John that he loved, there was no way he wasn't going to hurt you. It's just the way he was. That's it. That's the way he felt.
So the speculation is that it may have been somebody, like he may have been directly involved in him being missing 4 months later.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
Do I know? If you would have shown me irrefutable proof right now, you would show me that. Would I go, oh my God. No. You know what I would say? Okay.
Not surprised.
Okay. You know, John was a street guy. I pretty much summed him up. If he loved you, you weren't going to hurt somebody close to him without him hurting you. It's just the way it was.
What did your dad, I heard you say something. You said something about if you were a prosecutor, if you were a cop, you know, what did he love? What did he fear? What did he hate?
Loved loyalty. He loved loyalty. Loved his family. Loved loyalty. Loved his friend. He loved the camaraderie. I think he loved the camaraderie of what he was a little bit more than he loved his family, possibly. I'm not sure. I believe maybe he had some reservations about that later on in life, but I know that in the heat of it all, he should have been born 2,000 years earlier, and he would be Hannibal. He should have been born. That's the kind of look. I want to spend the next several hours just talking about John Gotti, but you can't give me that kind of time. And I can go into it, and I can make you understand. When I'm done, if you didn't like him, I'll get you to like him. If you liked him, I'll make you love him. because when he walked into a room, he lit it up. He was handsome and charming, very charismatic individual, and super intelligent. We would go out. Here's what we did, and I kept the tradition for years. We would go the first week of every month, and my father would take all the lawyers, all the high-powered lawyers in New York to dinner. And it would be, the usual cast of characters. It would be my father, it'd be Jackie D'Amico, Jackie the actor, myself, Bobby Borriello. We'd be there, and then there'll be 10 lawyers. And we'd be, you pick the restaurant, whether it was our place, we had a restaurant called Danoy on 74th in New York, or it was another place in particular. But he'd pick a different place. He would tell Jackie D'Amico was in charge. Jackie was in charge of that. Pick the place, and every first week of the month, we take all the lawyers to dinner. And the last week of the month, we take doctors to dinner. Tommy Gambino would come to dinner, and he had Schneider Pavilion, Long Island Jewish Hospital. Because we did a lot of fundraising through Tommy. Tommy raised an enormous amount of money. Tommy was a pillar of society. Great, great guy. Raised enormous amounts of money for Long Island Jewish Hospital, especially the Schneider Pavilion, which is the cancer wing, children. And through my father, they raised millions. I know Tommy himself raised millions. So we made it customary. Like the end of the month, my father would have dinner with Tommy and some of the old timers, and Tommy would bring like a lot of the doctors back then to dinner. And I would watch my father hold court with the lawyers, and his vernacular would be beautiful, wonderful. Perfect talk. Trees became threes, okay? Same with doctors. Same thing. And then all of a sudden we'd be at dinner with all the fellas, and this would be John Gotti, one hand in the pants like this. And I just lost $3,000. $3,000 on these fucking rat jets. $3,000 I just lost. He'd become Brooklyn all over again. He had a 140 IQ, and he had the ability to adapt to his environment.
He had a 140 IQ.
He had a 140 IQ, and we didn't test him. The Bureau of Prisons tested him. He had a 140 IQ. And he had the ability to adapt to his environment. So if he was sitting with lawyers, he'd hold court appropriately. If he was sitting with doctors, he would hold court appropriately. If he was sitting with gangsters, hoodlums, street guys, he'd hold court appropriately. He wasn't going to start now, all of a sudden being prim and proper, and suddenly, his, tea and his finger. He was a hoodlum. He was a hoodlum's hoodlum. He was described on Wiretap. From hardcore guys would say, you see that guy, John Gotti? Mm-hmm. That is a hoodlum's hoodlum. I think it's the highest compliment you can get if you're a hoodlum. By a hoodlum.
Yeah, that's and by the way, while you were there, at the peak of your father's popularity, right, where he can't walk anywhere, right, who else at this time who else are the kings of New York at the time? Would you put Trump at that level or not yet?
Well,
Trump, 80s, he is already, right? He's established.
His dad, Fred Trump, was an iconic figure in the construction industry. Especially we come from in Queens. So Jamaica Estates, I believe that's where they're from. And Donald Trump and I were alumni because he graduated class of 64. I'm class of 82, New York Military Academy. We both graduated the same school. So we have that in common. We're both Queens guys. His dad, Fred, was an iconic figure in Queens. He built a lot of buildings there. And Trump, at that point, was beginning to evolve into his own right. Donald Trump was now into the 80s, starting to evolve into his own right. He was taking the mantle from his dad, and he was carrying it moving forward. And I believe he described one time in an interview that his brother was an alcoholic. Donald Trump's brother was an alcoholic. So basically, everything, the responsibilities of the family, were bestowed onto his shoulders, Donald Trump's shoulders. And he had a great reputation in construction back then. I know that he always spoke well of my dad. In any conversation, any off-camera conversations he had with individuals, I know my father spoke highly of him for his business prowess. I'm not sure if they had a relationship or not. I'm not sure. You have other liars and punks that make things up, make stories up that, we knew Donald Trump, we paid Donald Trump. Listen, for the most part, it's probably all bullshit. Everybody can make any story they want to make up, but the reality is the reality.
Yeah, there was a story I think Sammy did. Sammy DeBoli says, we tried to buy him out and we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
He turned us down. And
I could tell you this much. I've seen and dealt with a lot of cooperators. If the government had employed, in my tenure, in my trials, over 100 cooperators came against me, and they forgave 110 murders to bring these guys against me. And many of them were complete frauds and fakes. Sammy Gravano was who he said he was. He was part of John's administration. He found his way through the door because of Frankie the Chico. Because Frankie was a somebody and Sammy was not a somebody. He found his way on Frankie's coattails. When Frankie got killed, Sammy became a somebody. John being that consummate diplomat, okay, and always looking loyal to Frankie the Chico, who was a tough guy, really good guy. That was one of his proteges, so he was brought along for the ride and became more than what he should have become. But that being said, to my father's fault, Sammy did evolve to that point, but many of the stories he had told was one more bullshit than the next. He sort of took himself and put himself in John Gotti's light and put John Gotti almost in his light. And to me, what really makes me, and again, I'm a civilian, 26 years. I have no axe to grind. People say, well, you're angry. Why am I angry? I won. I won. The United States government is the most powerful entity in the world. Will you agree?
For sure, yeah.
Have they toppled governments?
Absolutely.
Have they killed heads of state?
Many times. Some say just happened.
Yeah. I beat them. 5 trials in 37 months. 5 federal indictments, 37 months. I'm here talking to you. I'm not bitter. I'm excited. Christmas is coming. I'm going to be with my grandkids. I'm going to be with my family. I'm excited. I feel bad for my brothers that I left behind in prison, but I am the happiest guy you're ever going to meet. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm not bitter. But when you've got to view all this nonsense over and over again, and the lie after lie, and the fact that they've given absolution to 110 murders to over 100 individuals, and you can watch someone like Sammy Gravano that can sit there who took the coward's way out, a coward. He is a coward. Let's make no mistake about that, okay? He didn't do his time. He went in a witness protection program. He went into witness units, comfy, cushy units. If he wasn't at a safe house in Quantico, Virginia, then he was in a comfortable witness unit. Even his last bid, he talks about how he got a badge of honor from the Aryan Brotherhood, the clover on his arm. He was in a rat unit in ADX, Colorado, with other rats. So he took the easy way out. He doesn't have the right. Just go do your time. You did your time. You got away whatever you got away with. You got caught selling drugs to kids. You were released again from prison. Go on with your life. Tell your stories. Even if half of them are fabricated, go tell your stories. Don't you tell that my father, or John was going to sell me out first. Listen to me. There's not a rat that would tell you that. There's not a stand-up guy. You won't find a guy like John Gotti. John Gotti, as we say in the streets and in prison, he walked it all the way to the gate. He never one time. He could have been released from Marion, Illinois anytime he wanted to. All he had to do was sign a document. Everybody else that went there signed that document. There was a document that you're agreeing you're no longer the person that you were, and you're agreeing to what's called a step-down program. So when you get there, you have to be in Marion for a total of 18 months usually, and then you can leave Marion, Illinois, you can go to a regular penitentiary, a level 5 facility. Marion was the only level 6 in the country at that time, okay? My father refused to sign that paper. So he stood for 10 years in solitary confinement. Everybody else signed it. Anybody who went through Marion, Illinois signed that document, basically stating, I'm no longer the person I am. Here I am, I'm going to sign. I'm going to go to Unicor. I'm going to work. I'm going to be a good boy. And you could bring me to a regular prison because I'm going to be a good guy, okay? And I'm not saying that I begrudge them for taking that position, because maybe I would have signed it too, probably. It's not, you're not ratting anybody out. You're just basically saying, yeah, I'm no longer that guy anymore. Yeah, I'm no longer that guy anymore. I'm not a threat to you. No problem. My father's ego and his pride would not let him sign that paper. He should tell him, shove it up your ass. Shove it up your ass. And that's why he spent 10 years in Marion, Illinois.
He could have been out 10 years prior to that? And
he could have been out in 18 months. He could have been out in 18 months.
Now, when you're talking, you know this? You and your mother know you know this?
I know this because I handled the attorneys. And the attorney I hired for my father to try to get him out of Marion was Linda Sheffield. She was great with, BOP, post-conviction issues. I hired her. And she came and said, look, she showed me. I said, well, there's nothing wrong with this paper. This is basically saying that I do this every day. What'd you say I was? No, I'm no longer that guy. You got it. You're right. Okay. She says, well, I'm bringing this to your father. Bring it to my father. Tell him. This is how we can get him out of there. And he told her, you go back and tell my son, he ever sends something like this again, he can never come up and visit me again.
Oh, wow.
And that was the end of it. He never signed the paper. He wouldn't conform to their program. He wouldn't go along with what they wanted to say, okay, I'm no longer John Gotti anymore. He was going to die John Gotti. The way he lived is the way he was going to die. And I've interviewed people for projects I'm working on, which we're going to be coming out shortly with, people that were in Marion with my dad. shot callers for La M, Mexican Mafia, shot callers for the Aryan Brotherhood, shot callers for the Latin Kings. Interviewed them all. And what they had to say of what it was like to be around this man, the aura that he had. The shot caller's name was Black Bob for the Mexican Mafia. He used to refer to my father.
What was the name? Black Bob.
Black Bob for the Mexican, for the La MA. He used to refer to Latin King guys, keep an eye on the general. He used to call him Generale. He used to go like this with his fingers, Generale. And the stories you heard about how they received and accepted and loved and adored my father. This is how you do in time. He taught people how to do time. He taught people how to be a man, how to comport yourself like a man, okay? He did. And then you got someone like Sammy Gravano, who took the shortcut, abandoned his wife and kids, left them in the streets, knowing that people were going to kill his family, wanted to kill his family, left them like a dog that he was, went into WITSEC units, cared only about himself. And you want to sit there now and you want to bash someone like my father? You want to sit there and try to damage his character? Shame on him. Shame on him, and shame on the government that released him. Because they knew exactly what he was going to do. I have his psychological report right here. I have Sammy Gravano's report. And you know what the report says? The report says that, A, he's got selfish, his tendencies lean towards his selfishness, his self-preservation. And it goes on to say, if released from prison, he is a tremendous aspect in his qualities of life that he would certainly avert back to, and I'm trying to piece together word for word, his criminal ways, including violence. And yet, two different psychologists, two different government psychologists had issued these reports. And both were right, and the government still released him and made him somebody else's neighbor. They didn't make them their neighbor. The FBI agents didn't put him next door to their house. They put him sort of somebody else's house. And what did he do? Once he went to Colorado, what did he do? Well, he was in a relationship. I guess it was an abusive relationship. Something happened there. Signed himself out of the program and found his way back to Phoenix, Arizona, where he became a narcotics pusher to kids, okay? And tried to recruit other individuals. And the government, the FBI, knew a lot of what was going on here. This is why the Attorney General in Arizona, Janet Napolitano, her name was, let me get it right, Janet Napolitano, had to do a secretive investigation on him and wouldn't even let the FBI or any federal agency know, or anybody else outside of her office know what was going on, because she was afraid it was going to be compromised. Now, my point is this. I hardly knew him on the street, Sammy Gravano. I hardly knew him, okay? And he certainly does not know me. He could say anything he wants about me. He doesn't know me, okay? That being said, I'm a Queens guy. He was a Brooklyn guy. I stood in Queens. My father was a man of the world. I was not. I was a Queens guy. Quite simple. But you took the easy way out. What happened to when you met somebody in battle and you either won or you lost? What happened to giving that person, if you respected that individual, if that individual showed up and fought that fight, and you respected him as a man, what happened to giving that respect in death? What happened to honoring that? Could you sit here and say, this guy hit me the hardest and he never quit and came fighting, what I'm going to say now, he was a piece of cake, he was a dog. No, you're supposed to turn around and say, this guy was a worthy adversary. This guy really took it to me. He was something special. My father took it to the government. He gave them fits. It took them 4 trials to convict him. He beat them 3 in a row. Okay? Took them 4 trials. Give that man his credit. He was intelligent enough to maneuver you. When everybody else lost, he won. Remember that. And he refused to back down and be anybody else. Me, I would drive a minivan, and I would put a sweatsuit on, put a hat over my eyes. Okay? John? Right in your face. He was afraid of no one and nothing. You give that man his credit, and certainly in death, you give a man an honorable death. You give him his credit. To sit there and take the position that this coward had taken and repetitively takes, to me, is a disgrace.
Can I ask you a question? So for
Sure.
me, when I did that interview, I go to New York all the time. I love New York. I love the people. I get along with the people. And, later on in life, when I did Ancestry, when you find out what your background's all about, apparently I'm 18% Italian. Someone in my family hooked up with an Italian we don't know about, right? So I've always gotten along with Italians. I go to New York, and you have to, you would be like, how could you interview Sammy? He is lying. He's this, he's that. And then I would have some guys that would come up there and say, but look, you heard the recording? you know, recording when John kind of threw Sammy under the bus.
Never happened.
What I'm saying to you is in the recording. So Sammy,
John should have killed Sammy, quite frankly.
well, that's what Sammy said. He thought he was going to kill him.
He should have killed him earlier. He should have killed him. Listen, Sammy was a guy that was green eyes. He was a monster. Okay, this is a guy, and he talks about, you know, this is an amazing thing because when they go in front of the judge, when they're going to get their sentence reduced, all of these cooperators, what they do is they cry and say, "I only pulled the trigger one time," including Sammy. He said he only pulled the trigger one time. But now he boasts, 19 kills, I killed 19 people. No, he conspired. He schemed and killed 19 people. Let's get that straight. And including 2 innocent people. Nobody wants to talk about the 2 innocent people. Why? Why don't anybody want to talk about Alan Kaiser, a 16-year-old boy that through mistaken identity, not Louis Melito, Sammy Gravano shot Alan Kaiser in the head. I know this because I've interviewed people in his crew. When Sammy flipped, okay, I brought them into the lawyers' offices and told them, look, guys, open up. Be truthful here, because they knew I was their protector. They knew that there was a faction within the group that wanted to kill all of them for being loyal to Sammy at one time, including Sammy's family. I wouldn't let it happen. There's another cooperator named Mikey Scars DiLeonardo. He knew all the particulars. In fact, I was using Michael to drive them into the city. I trusted Michael. I said, Michael, they got my word, safe passage. I made him bring them up to my Pocono house. This way they felt comfortable. We hunted together. They were suspicious that maybe I was looking to kill them. We met, we spoke. I said, look, nobody's going to harm you guys. Nobody's going to harm you.
This is Mikey Scars or no?
This is Mikey Scars was close to me and Michael bringing them in, and I have assured all of Sammy's crew, nobody's going to harm you guys, okay? But I'm keeping you guys, I'm helping you. I'm here, I'm in your corner. John, unless John, that order comes from John, and it never will come from John, you guys are safe. But you have to cooperate here with us. You have to go in and talk to the lawyers. You have to tell us everything about Sammy Gravano. John Gotti met Sammy Gravano for the first time in 1977 when he came out of prison. He met him for the first time. And he only met him through a couple of nightclubs coming and going, okay? He didn't really know Sammy well enough. He began to know him later on in life, so we need to get all these facts put together. So I established what I call the Eddie Garofalo file, okay, which was his brother-in-law. Eddie Garofalo was his brother-in-law, his older brother-in-law. And he opened up. And I have all that, all the interview we done, he opened up, we have it all typed up. And he talks about the rift between Sammy Gravano and Louis Melito. And the rift happened because Louis Melito, who was a tough guy, a stand-up guy and a real tough guy in his own right. And Sammy had a problem. Apparently he had a problem what he thought was some bikers. They roughed him up or whatever. He went and got Louis and came back. And both had guns on them. Sammy says, that's one of them right there. They rolled up on the kid. Sammy rolled down the window and shot the kid in the head. He always said that Louis Melito did it. Louis Melito never forgave him for putting him in that position. The kid went down as a John Doe at first, until at some point later on, they came to a conclusion who this kid was. And even when the FBI was issuing the reports of all his murders, that kid was down as John Doe, okay, which is an insult to his family. Alan Kaiser was down as John Doe, which is an insult to his family. But Louis Melito never let Sammy live that down, that he was put in that position and an innocent 16-year-old kid was shot in the head and killed. He never let him live that down. And Sammy at some point conspired, because Louis would slap Sammy. Louis was a tough guy and Sammy wasn't. And at some point, they had it came to a point, and Sammy went to the chief and basically made up a story that this guy's, was loyal to Paul or whatever. It was a cockamamie story, okay? It's probably above my pay grade. But ultimately, in the end, he conspired and got Louis Melito killed, okay? This is what he does. But you take that, for example, and you take his brother-in-law, ex-brother-in-law, Nick Scabetta. He talks about how Paul authorized him to kill Nick Scabetta. If Paul knew who Nick Scabetta was, excuse my crassness, am I allowed to curse?
Sure.
Whatever's not nailed down in this room, you could shove up my ass. How's that sound? If Paul had any idea who a guy named Nick Scabetta was. He was a civilian. From what Mikey Scars told me, he told me they went to school together. He said he was a happy-go-lucky kid, riding his bicycle in the area. Yeah, he had some problems like everybody else, like a lot of other people did at that time. But he didn't warrant to be killed. He got killed because he knew some deep, dark secrets maybe about Gravano. But that certainly was not a warranted mob killing. Those were 2 killings there that you could take them immediately off that list. Those were civilians. So to sit there and project yourself as this guy, this good guy. He was never a good guy. He was a treacherous, scheming guy. Money was his God. His family was alive because of me. My father, when Sammy first flipped, the first visit went to see him. He was sick to his stomach. He said, you know what? I violated my own ethics, he said.
Who's saying this, Sammy?
My father saying this to me.
Yeah.
In the visit in MCC, when they walked Sammy out that night. The previous night, actually. I think it was November 8th, if I'm not mistaken. He says, punk couldn't do any time. He said, the punk couldn't do any time. He says, that's it. He couldn't do time. And I says, well, and I'm watching him vent a bit, my father. He's like this, and he's looking back, and he's completely beside himself. Like, you know, he's disappointed, not that he didn't expect, he's disappointed in himself for allowing this guy to move up. He's disappointed. His love for Frankie the Chico and some of the old timers that were proponents of Gravano for listening. John there were better choices, and he allowed this guy to become what he is. And he fully knew before they got pinched what he was. He started now to pay attention and see what Sammy really was, okay? And I'm waiting for instructions like, what are we supposed to do? Here we are, we're sitting here, and I'm here, and Jackie D'Amico, my Uncle Pete, we're listening to my father. And then he turns to me and he says, you make sure, John, nobody harms his family. We don't do that. You make sure nobody harms his family. I left. Gathered everybody up and went to everybody, went to all the social clubs, spoke to everybody, and I said, make sure. And I got a lot of pushback. There was a group of individuals that wanted to take his house down. They wanted to take his house down with his family in it. And they wanted it, and they couldn't have his crew, they wanted them. And I told them, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. This is not Italy. Okay, this is America. John Gotti is not those men. It's not going to happen, and that's that. And we did not let it happen. Did he care? Did he care? He went into the program. Now, remember now, he went into the program and did this when the mob wasn't squeamish on hurting people. Maybe they are now. But they had a penchant for hurting people back then. A lot of people. Okay?
John, is it fair to say, you know, for the audience that's watching this, rightfully so, you have to defend 100% your father, nothing,
Absolutely.
You know, so emotionally.
And always will.
And by the way, no one expects anything different, right?
Right.
Now, you know, for the viewer who is not emotionally connected, like I remember when I interviewed Sammy, your sister came after me. I don't know if you remember you know.
I've never watched the interview.
Okay, well, I'll tell you.
I'm not computer literate. I never watch any podcast.
No,
I don't do it.
Well, I think that's good for you because it's more peaceful.
I just don't do it.
But I mean, I got tweets after tweets. You realize what, you know, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, messages, phone calls, all this stuff. But for somebody that's not attached to it emotionally, did you ever listen to the recording? You know, the recording that they say where your father is.
I have them. I have the original tapes. It's he talking to Frankie Locasio and saying, Frankie was an older man. Frankie was one of the classiest operators in that world, was probably one of the youngest guys in history to get the job, to go into that world, to go into that life. I think it was about 23 when he got the job, Frankie. And my father trusted Frankie. He was an elder statesman, a man of very limited words. Very limited words. In fact, the only time I really ever had him, he had an open conversation or really spoke was at his sentencing. Is when he told Judge Glasser that I'm innocent, you're giving me a life sentence. However, it's an honor to be John Gotti's friend. If there were more men like John Gotti in this world would be a better place. And he praised my father to the high heavens because Frankie was a traditional loyalist. He adored my father adored him right back. Okay, right back. So this is John Gotti, who does he talk to? There's no complaint department. He is it. The buck stops with John Gotti, right? So he's talking to his number 2 guy, Frankie, very close to him. He's talking to Frankie. He's saying, Frankie, what do you want me to do here? He says, I've got all skippers coming in. This one's coming. His names, they're coming in. He keeps opening up businesses all over the place. We're not supposed to open up businesses. Paul did that. We're not supposed to open up businesses. We're supposed to let the men open the businesses. They got to earn. Okay, the men have to earn. They'll take care of us. But we can't be robbing contracts. We can't be doing this, that, or the other thing. We can't be doing these things. Sammy was killing people and then taking over their companies or going into a particular business, whereas that drywall. There was a company that operated and sold and did drywall, okay? Now, they would do their business. They would comply with the bids, and they would grease the right skids to keep things moving along. But then, Sammy, if you're an administrator, you're not supposed to have a crew. You're not supposed to have being in business where you can compete with the men and take business away from them. It's a no-brainer then, because you're the guy who's assigning the jobs. So you're going to assign all the jobs to yourself, okay? And this is what he was doing, and John was at wit's end. And he was looking for a little guidance from Frankie, someone he knew for many, many years and he trusted. Like, how do I react to this guy? I'm going to pull his card. I'm going to pull him in and address him on this. But Frankie, what's the right approach? And it wasn't just one visit. It wasn't just one wiretap. It was two different separate occasions. There were two different dates, two different wiretaps where he's talking to Frankie. And then there's a third one, which Sammy doesn't talk about, where John is addressing Sammy, okay? And he's telling Sammy basically, okay, this is at the end of all of this. He comes to terms with it, not in that wiretap, not in any of those wiretaps. Frankie goes and gets Sammy, brings him to the chief late at night, and my father reads him the riot act. And he basically tells him, enough now, enough. We got men coming in complaining about you. You got skippers coming in, so on and so forth, complaining about you. You want to be a captain? I'll reduce you back to a captain. You want to be a soldier? I'll reduce you back to a soldier. No, okay, then enough now. Back off. You can't be doing these things. And that was it. There was an understanding. And that's why you hear that tape afterwards of John saying, I'm getting pinched soon. Okay? I'm going away. Okay? And I know what I got to do once I go away. I got a life sentence. I know what I got to do. But what are you comfortable being? And he's trying to ask him what kind of position you would want to be in. So obviously, John came to terms. Sammy had the understanding of what John's expectations were of him, and everybody was going to move forward. Now, you heard those tapes at bail hearings. Mm-hmm. He did, meaning Sammy did. You were John's cellmate. You were my father's cellmate. Why don't you take care of your business? Why don't you take care of your business? He said nothing. He said nothing, okay? He understood my father was angry at him.
Wait, what do you mean by that? Why don't you take care of business?
Should have killed John. You were a cellmate. Kill him. That door locks. It's you and the man.
Well, he said he wanted to.
He did. And I want to fly a space shuttle. But I don't know how to, okay? Sammy never did a tough guy thing other than scheme. And he said he pulled the trigger one time. You believe the story that he got the nickname because he was a good fighter, the Bull? Do you believe that? He told you that, right? Did he tell you that on your show? Did he say that he got my nickname, the Bull, came because some old-timers and say, oh, look at the little Bull? No. He got the nickname the Bull because he's from Bull's Head, Staten Island. There were 3 different individuals that were in that group. So to identify, Sammy from Bull became Sammy Bull. That's what he became. Because back then, Sammy was, according to the psychological report, they have him here at 5'6", but I'm 5'9", I can eat an apple off of his head. So I know he's not 5'6", he's probably closer to 5'4", 5'5". And I remember him back then. He went to beautician school. He was a very thin guy. He wasn't no bull. He became a bull years later when he thought he was going to prison and he began taking steroids. He became a bull. When he was working out in the gym with Frankie Fabiano and other individuals, and they told me he was taking the needles in his ass and they blew up to go to prison because he was so afraid of going to jail, so he wanted to put some muscle on. That's when he became a bull. But before that, he was just little Sammy from Bull's Head, which became Sammy Bull. So the nickname was a lie, okay? And again, look, I didn't want to come on the air, and I'm not here. I don't give a second thought to Sammy Gravano. I really don't. I don't watch podcasts. I don't. I'm just not. I'm not computer literate. I don't go online and do it. But he doesn't have the right. He doesn't have the right when a guy that you knew was a man's man. You saw that man, how he comported himself, how John Gotti comported himself. I've never seen anybody like him, and I've seen them all. And I'm not saying it because he's my father. Would I defend him regardless? Always.
Of course.
Always. But I'm going to tell you something, Pat, not to interrupt you.
Please, go for it.
But just to tell you this much, there's limits in how far I can go in my defense of my father. But when I have an opportunity to observe this man, and when people who did time in the most violent prisons in the country, if not the world, okay, in the most secure places in the world, and saw how he comported himself, if they're the ones who are further filling my head, if they're further filling my balloon, my head, to keep preaching the gospel, preaching John Gotti, okay, the attributes of John Gotti, look, he was the real deal. If he wasn't, you say, he's my father, I loved him. And you can rest on that note and go on to something else.
So you know what it does? Like in life, I get judged for who I befriend. Right. I get judged for who I marry. We get judged for choices we make, investments, all this other stuff. But then you also get judged for who you make your right-hand guy. Your dad made him the underboss.
Made a mistake.
So if he is who you say he is, Sam,
yeah,
that means your dad's a bad judge of character, because the underboss is like, I mean, it's who John, wasn't John that to, who was the underboss with Paul Castellano before, he was taken out at state?
Remember, Pat, to answer that question, remember Frankie DeChico was the guy. Frankie got blown up.
Right.
He got killed. Great man, a tough guy. And again, the picture, if there's a picture of my father and Frankie as kids in their 20s. Frankie was, I think, 4 or 5 years older than my dad. My father's 28 years old, and Frankie's maybe 32, 33, in Lewisburg Penitentiary with Mickey Boy Paradiso and other individuals. These guys cut their teeth in the maximum security penitentiary together. They put work in together. This goes back to the MCC visit, what my father says. Punk couldn't do any time. My father violated his own belief. His belief is if you didn't do time with John Gotti, he ain't making you nobody. You ain't going nowhere with John Gotti. Everybody in John's circle did time with John Gotti. Everybody. Frankie DeChico was very close to my father because he did time with my father. He did time in Lewisburg Penitentiary, okay? In the unit, walked the yard with my father, went to wars with my father. Say, Frankie, that was Frankie's position. When Frankie got killed, John, being the diplomat, did what he believed. He didn't do the right thing, but he did what he believed to be the right thing. Took a Brooklyn guy. Frankie's close friend was Sammy Gravano. He already took Frankie's old position, and now he moved him along and put him in that position in a somewhat quasi-acting position for Frankie. In Frankie's stead, Frankie being dead. He moved him along and cultivated him along. And you have to understand something, okay? The Sammy Gravano that you see today, and the Sammy Gravano that did time the way he did the time, was not the Sammy Gravano on the streets. Sammy's not a stupid guy. Sammy knows how to say the right things and do the right things. Sammy was an earner. Sammy went out. He knew how to turn the rocks over. He knew how to go find the money. He knew how to do things. He knew how to talk to people, okay? And he knew how to get things done. He was a schemer. He was a plotter. He was one of those guys. It takes a unique character to lure your best friend into a place and fully knowing, and you're having a cup of coffee and you can kill him right there on the spot. I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that. In fact, I believe I'm not, okay? So that just goes to tell you the depth of his character. So if he can do something like that, what else could he do? There's different people, you know. Well, I used to say this, not to interrupt you, please. I used to say this. I brought home a lot of good men from prison with me and helped get them jobs. As long as they're civilians, we're friends, okay? I walked away from my former life, my former existence, and I tell them the same thing. If you're going to revert back and go back to the former gang, your crew, whatever have you, please, just leave me out of this. I've been through enough. I've been through enough. My family's been through enough. But if you're going to do the right thing, okay, you're going to be a true blue brother in every sense of the word. Take care of your family. We'll be there for each other. But that's as far as it goes. I got your back. There's no problems at all. But I know these people, and I brought them over, and I bring these people to meet my family. I bring these people to my son's fights. I brought 500 people to my son's fight in Florida when he fought Floyd Mayweather. 60 were convicts. 60 of them were convicts at the time, either my father or I. 3 of them were married with my dad. And you want to know what? You can't hide in prison. If you want to see someone's flaws, if you want to see their character, you want to see if they're real men or not, you can't hide in prison because I'm with you 24/7. I can see everything about you. I could tell you when you brush your teeth. I could tell you when you wash your ass. You can't hide in prison. In the streets, you could hide. You could hide. You see me 4 times a week for 2 hours each time or an hour, and you say the right things. You comport yourself. You open the umbrella when you have to open the umbrella. You open the door when you have to open the door. You walk like a gentleman. You talk like a gentleman. You know exactly when you should speak, okay? When the boss isn't present, when the boss walks in the room, when the chief walks in the room, in his presence, you know when you're supposed to speak and when you're not supposed to speak. Sammy knew those things. You see him in the pictures holding the umbrella for my father. You see him. You see him opening the door. You see him. You see him pushing John Miller and the reporters back out of the way when John is walking down the street. You see him. He did his job. Did a pretty good job, okay? But again, it goes back to come full circle what John said. You can't put a guy in that position unless you know if he's capable of doing time. My father used to say this, and he said this in Marion, Illinois, and he was a hypocrite in this respect. He said, John, looking back, to be a street guy and to live this life the right way, you should never get married, you should never have kids, never get married, never have kids, you have to devote yourself to this, and every guy would have to qualify, should do 1 year in Marion, Illinois, in a lockdown, maximum level 6 prison. This is the worst of the worst. Show me you could do this, you could do anything. Okay? Now I know you ain't going to flip, you ain't going to turn on your brotherhood, you ain't going to turn, you're going to be a man because your honor is going to keep you intact. Sammy wasn't capable of doing any of that. He fell apart the moment he went to jail. I mean, we've interviewed a guy who was the leader of the Ghost Shadows, a kid named Brian. The Ghost Shadows was a Chinatown gang. And he ended up somehow locked with Sammy. And he was sending messages and kites back to us. This guy's not comporting himself right. He's not doing time right. And my father began to have reservations about the choice that he made. And then shortly thereafter, several months later, sure enough, in the middle of the night, they walked him out, and we found out the next day. And my father was dead. That was him sitting there in the visiting room and questioning what he did. He didn't put the blame on anybody else. He put the blame on himself. Because he made up until that point, he made all the right calls. I believe he did. I mean, as now an outsider looking in, I believe John made the right calls. I did. I think he put the right people in place. He had tremendous amount of loyalty. Take into consideration the impact of Sammy Gravano flipping. Okay, he's the guy who is supposedly the top, right? The boss is here. He knows all the secrets. Certainly was a greedy guy. He knew all the money was. That's for damn sure. Okay. Now, as a result of Sammy flipping, minimum 57 guys get indicted. 57 guys, many of them high level, okay, due to his cooperation. He's a tremendous asset for the government, but he is a tsunami to the streets. There's an enormous panic going on now. People are running and hiding and whispering now, okay? And yet, we had that time, all those cases, that barrel of cases that came our way, there was one rat. Sammy Gravano. Wasn't anybody else. You know how many guys got life without parole? You know how many guys got 50-year bids? My Uncle Gene just came home, did 29 straight years. Okay? You know how many guys are just coming home now? They're just now coming out old men. They're drifting out of prison. That was all the guys that were around John Gotti, that grew up around John Gotti, the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club crew around John Gotti, the guys East New York around John Gotti, the Fatico boys, okay, around John Gotti. All those guys that grew up with John, okay? You had a confidential informant named Willie Boy Johnson, and that was it. That's all you had. And even he did better time than Gravano. When it came time to testify, they put him 22 months in solitary confinement, refused to flip, stood up, went to trial, and they won the trial. Ultimately, in the end, he was killed. But the point I'm trying to make is that up until that point, when John became that person, not that low, he became that guy, that administrator, okay? I believe for the most part, he made the right decisions. Now as an observer on the outside looking in, looking back, fancying myself a historian and replaying the whole scenario in my head. And now as an older, wiser head looking, not a young warrior that's full of testosterone that's ready to jump into the battle. Now as an older guy with lower testosterone that would probably make a better general today than he was then. Okay, that's me today. And now observing and replaying John's moves, my father's moves. And other than him being a degenerate gambler and the Gravano decision that he made, I don't know of many things that you could have redone differently because John did it from the perspective of how he was raised and taught by his elders, the way they taught him. And I think for the most part, those guys did hard time, did it all. Now, was he right going to the Ravenite and the clubs and all that? No, I don't agree with that, but he wasn't going to back down. That was the problem. It's like a fighter that's tailor-made. Mike Tyson's a knockout puncher, and you're not going to put, say, like in my time, a little older than you are, a Jerry Quarry-esque fighter who didn't know how to do anything else, other tough guy that's going to come forward and you got to knock him out. And John was one of those guys. He's going to come forward. He's not going to dodge and duck. He doesn't know how to. He didn't have that kind of finesse. He was what he was, and he wasn't going to hide it. So he was tailor-made to be knocked out by the government.
Do you think the situation where he put a hit on Paul Castellano, you think that was the right move? You said two bad moves, right? Gambling, and you said Sammy. But how about the hit on Paul?
I don't know. Again, that's above my pay grade, okay? I do know this much. Sammy's interpretation of those events differ from the reality of what took place there, okay? And at a later date, we put together a compilation. We put together pieces together, including visits between my father and I. It's not quite what Sammy says. In fact, when they were supposed to shoot the movie, the Gotti movie, they screwed up. The budget changed dramatically.
First one or second one?
Second one. First one was pretty good. Second one, John Travolta did an amazing job. However, the budget was nothing. It was not there. They took a screenplay. They took my book, and they went someplace else with it. But the ending was supposed to be shot where you saw the ending of the movie?
I've seen both movies.
Okay. See the ending? Gravano's behind the driver's seat. John's in the passenger seat. Okay. Then the actual ending, that's how it ends. And then the actual ending comes back, and there's a reflection on the stand. And headlights pass into the car. And it's Bobby Borriello driving the car, and John's in the passenger seat. Sammy wasn't even there. Now, again, the truth comes from the teller of the story. So the truth is in the telling. Sammy's the only one that's telling the story. Nobody else is telling the story but Sammy Gravano.
Wait, you're saying now that your father didn't tell Sammy to go do the job to take out
I'm saying
Paul?
my father, in a wiretapped visiting room in Marion, Illinois, talking to me, had said to me, when he's reading the story about how this thing, and after this conviction, he looked at me and he says, John, he says, I don't know what happened to that Paul, nor do I care. I don't care what happened to him, he says. But if Sammy Gravano was within 10 miles of Paul getting hurt, your brother should rot in hell. He would never say that because he adored my brother. So that was John Gotti's words. Again, this was above my pay grade. I was a kid then. This wasn't my game.
Now, that's a very interesting twist right there, because
it is.
For me, this stuff, I understand the emotional stuff, that when it's blood, it's blood. I mean, it's and not just blood, admiration for father. You're not going to be able to.
I adore my father.
That's exactly the point. So there's no winning there. But at the same time, you get judged for hiring him. You get judged for promoting him. And I would assume when it comes later on, let's just say if you got the job of being a boss by taking out your boss, let's just say if that's the story that we see around in the world. I mean, I can't
verify that story.
I totally get it.
It's above my pay grade.
What I'm saying is, for what's been documented and the people you sit down and talk to who were maybe in that world where they were that age. I've sat with a lot of different people who are older, would come to me, Ralph Natali and Phil Leonetti and Francis, and I had a chance to one time, I had 3 visits with Sonny Francis, Michael's father, who did, I think, 55 years in jail. I think he died at 103 or 104
No, he had a 55-year sentence. He did a lot less, but he was a good man. He was a stand-up guy. Certainly was a man's man and a legend on the streets.
That's what everybody says. Like, he was a guy that Omerta was like the face of Omerta. He would not break for.
Sonny was a solid guy, and I had the honor and pleasure of meeting him at a wedding. A real gentleman.
I took him to an Italian restaurant, and John, I got to tell you, I'm trying to get him to say, Sonny, I'm his driver. I'm driving him to his favorite Italian restaurant. I came and got him from the I think it's like an old folks home, and Michael's there, and we're going out. His lawyer's there.
Where'd you go, to Bamonte's?
I don't know what we went to. I can figure out the name to see where it was.
Right.
But we went there for 3 hours. Nothing. When I tell you nothing, John.
He didn't say anything.
No, he spoke.
Oh, okay.
But I told him, tell me about Meyer. Good guy.
Yeah.
Tell me about Bugsy. You would never call him that to his face. Yeah. Sorry. He's Mr. Siegel to you.
Yeah.
Tell me about this, tell me about that, right?
Yeah.
But in the world, if you come up fast in the limelight and showmanship and all this stuff, like the movie American Gangster, which is a story of Frank Lucas, where, Denzel is like, hey, why'd you give me that jacket? I don't want to be seen. I don't want to have this, right? And sometimes, the criticism is the fact that he was seen all the time. Right. So he was, in my mind, when I'm asking Sammy, was he at a point that he's worried that Sammy's about to take him out to do to him what he may have done to Paul?
Listen.
That was my understanding.
Listen to me, please. And this I have to say.
Please.
John Gotti would never start a fire he could not put out. What that means is very simply this. And just like when John Gotti went to Marion, Illinois, okay, anything that may have happened or anything that anybody was put in place or anything was done, those are fires that could have been put out at any time they needed to be put out. So let's understand this. Sammy was whoever he was, and he had a large crew around him, and then John had the Bergen crew, had a very large crew around him. What about the ones you never seen? What about the people you never seen? We saw everybody around Sammy. We knew them all. That roster had to come in. They had to be vetted, all those guys, okay? John had individuals you never seen, you never met. My father had individuals. They weren't allowed to come in. They weren't allowed to go to weddings. They weren't allowed to be seen. Their job was to stay away, and if something's got to be done, they'll do it. They'll take care of it. So that's a fire that John could have put that fire out any time he wanted to put that fire out. So let's make no mistake about that. That's a fire that could have been put out any time that John would want to put that fire out. And not just with Sammy. Moving forward, while he was in Marion, what did people think this guy was? His whole life, this was a true blue hoodlum. His whole life, this is what he aspired to be. Super intelligent individual. You think there was a plan A and never a plan B? There was never a situation where John would say, what if? What if this went wrong? What do we do? This is going to happen. What if I do this? How do I undo this? This is how you undo it. Okay? He always had a solution to the problem. And he and I would talk, and we would talk in Marion. We would talk just by looking at each other. We understood each other. I understood what he wanted, his likes and dislikes. Okay? And you think that he would ever put himself in a position? In fact, he got caught in an unguarded moment on a wiretap. He said, you think anybody's capable of rocking me to sleep like Paul got rocked to sleep? I think he said that on a wiretap, if I'm not mistaken, right? You're not going to rock John to sleep. He knew exactly what he was doing at all times. If you wanted him, he would be easy to get him, but he had a plan. He always knew what he had to do. My father, every Saturday, same routine, drove to the cemetery to go see my brother, stood there alone. He insisted nobody's allowed to take him. I wasn't allowed to go in the car with him. Nobody was allowed to follow him. He would go there because he wanted to mourn. If you had a problem with him, here he was, okay? But he knew exactly what he was doing at all points in his life. He knew exactly what he needed to do.
Do you think, I remember one time Sammy and I are speaking, and the story was about the fact that, when, let's just say you're running a business.
Right.
And, I'm the guy that's not golfing 6 days a week. And I'm not even saying that's just an analogy. So I'm a guy that I started a company. I'm rich now. I'm worth $50 million. I'm golfing 6 days a week. I'm going to the spa. Maybe I'll come and check out the office and all this stuff. But my right-hand guy is the one that goes and checks on everybody. He's there every day. And he's at the office 6 days a week. Right. Now the crew, the field, the customers, the clients are closer to him than they're closer to the one at the top that's the famous guy. Do you think something like that happened with Sammy and your father? You know what I'm saying? The shaking hands.
Again, he's a legend in his own mind. Sammy was very popular in Brooklyn. Queens, he was nobody to us. Nobody. In fact, people can care less one way or the other about him. He was very popular with individuals in Brooklyn. Anywhere else, nobody cared about Sammy. We didn't quite understand him and it. That being said, he was no legend to us. He was a cultivation that John moved along. But to even think that he can take on the persona of who John Gotti was, come on. Look, there was something to him. My father was that guy. I got in the car. He went to the Bronx. He stood in the clubs in the Bronx with Frankie Lucasio and the fellas in the Bronx. He went to Brooklyn. He showed up in Brooklyn. He showed up in Queens. He showed up in Staten Island. He showed up in Manhattan all the time. I bought my father a house in the Poconos, and I bought him that house for a reason. I said, Dad, I got this house now. We bought it from a friend of ours named Louis Studo. Bought the house. Dad, go stay there. And if anybody needs to see you, we'll bring them to see you, okay? He said, look and say, that's not who I am, John. That's not who I am. He was out 5 days a week, and even when he wasn't out, he was out. Because he was out in the city 5 days a week and hitting the boroughs 5 days a week, being seen and touched. Shouldn't have. Nobody else did that. But he had everybody see him and touch him and know he was real. He did that 5 days a week. And then on the sixth day, And even the seventh day, Sunday, which belongs to us, okay, should belong to his family. After dinner, what did he do? He drove to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club and played poker. And everybody knew to find him there. Another 20 guys would come in on Sunday night and mill around the table and hang out and watch him play cards and go in the back and eat a veal cutlet sandwich. He was always available. The only time he wasn't available was Saturday night. He was with my mother, dinner in a restaurant or home, and Sunday afternoon, dinner at home. Other than that, he was available. In essence, 7 days a week.
Was he a good poker player?
He was a good card player. His preference wasn't poker. His preference was continental. He loved continental.
You were saying that.
Yeah. I adapted that off my father. That was his preference. And they used to play a high stake game, him and a lot of the old timers.
Was it risky beating him or no?
No.
Like if you beat him, he'd pay you in. He wouldn't be upset.
My father paid all his debts, and I used to see him. I used to watch him gamble and play cards, and they used to play a high stake game. Petey Castellano and Jimmy Brown Fiella. These guys had money. These were money guys. And he put up a couple of guys in the game, like Jackie the actor didn't have much money. You know, he was a hard-working grinder. My father would tell him, Jackie, get in the game. And he'd put him up. And at the end, like if my father won, he would tell Jackie, say, how'd you do? And Jackie would always overestimate his loss. Instead of say I lost 10,000, he'd say I lost 15,000. He says, you cocksucker, you think I ain't fucking paying attention? You lost 12,000. And he'd give it right back to him. And he'd throw it right back to him. He'd give it back to him. He just wanted the thrill. Because maybe when he was younger, you know, it was that he had to be in that hunt. And sure, winning that money was something special. But as he got older, let's go post 85, 86, 87. He had plenty of money. He wasn't gambling for the money anymore. He was just for the thrill. He needed to be in it. And when he won, how'd you do, Jack? Okay, or he bet numbers. I'll give you an interesting story, a gambling story. Joe Messina, a guy named Joe Messina. He was accused of being the shot caller for the Banana Group. They were partners in a crap game. They had a crap game together, okay? And they went and my father's job was, you know, he used to go there. They were partners, and my father used to like to get into the game. Joe really didn't gamble. Joe was a money guy. And my father gets in the game, and he winds up winning $90,000 in their own game. He wins $90,000, okay? And then what he does is, afterwards, because, you know, Joe was pretty tight. So my father takes $10,000 off of it. Joe gets 40, he gets 40, and he gets 10,000, and he gives us all the numbers. He calls all the numbers guys and the tips. He gives out tips and gives the number guys action, okay? Gives them all action. And Joe's looking at him like, it's our money. And he put 10,000 back in the game, okay? Back in the room. They hit the number the next day, my brother Frankie Boy's birthday, 015. They hit it for $375,000. Yeah. True story. This is in 1983.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, okay? This is before he became John Gotti. This is a lot of money. Now, Joe's a smart guy. Joe took his end, and he bought some modular homes in the old side of Howard Beach. John Gotti got down on the Jets and anybody else. He threw it right back into the action, right back into the game. That's the kind of guy he was. He was a guy, you had to look at him because money meant very little to him. It should have meant a lot more because it gives more stability to your family when you know you're not going to be there. But to him, it didn't matter much.
350 and 83 is 1.1 million today. That's a lot of money.
Think about that.
That's a lot of money.
Think about that.
So going back to New York City, you've been there since '64. That's all. The only place you've ever lived is New York, minus being out, right?
Yeah, I was born in Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, from South Brooklyn. Moved to Canarsie at 5 years old. 10 years old, Howard Beach. Out to Long Island I moved.
How much has New York changed? And is it, in your opinion, safer today or is it safer back in the days?
Much safer. Well, wait. From what perspective are we talking about? Meaning, was it safer to be a street guy back then? No. Is it safer to be a street guy today? Yeah, I think so. You have to understand in both aspects of that, okay? It's a tricky question, but both aspects of it, because then if you just ran afoul or you did something wrong or someone thought you did something wrong, you ended up with two in your hat and in a dumpster. Today, that doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't happen. It's a kind of gentler street, okay, in that respect. And also now on the other side of that as well, back then, there were 400 FBI agents that were employed against the street light. In the tri-state area, there were 400 FBI agents. Today, there's less than 40.
Why?
I don't know. I don't give them the budget. I don't approve the budget. there's less than 40. I guess because the technological advances that they can track you through computers. I guess they have a higher count of informants in that life. Maybe the information moves differently. Look, I could tell you it was far more difficult back in John's time to be a street guy than it is today. Today, it ain't quite the same. It's just not. It's not. You're not living the life the way John lived it. To be perfectly frank.
Is it non-existent, or is it still out there? People are talking. They're doing their thing.
And again, I'm 26 years removed, so there's still somewhat of a fascination, even for me. There's a lot of endearing individuals that I knew, called Uncle. Still call him today. I did time with a lot of these gentlemen as well. They're special people. They're special guys that they could have been successful in a whole host of things in their lives if they really chose to be. Especially John, especially my father. Again, that wasn't an exaggeration. That was an accurate statement that he had a 140 IQ.
That's wild.
He could have done anything he wanted in his life. He'll tell you. He says it. He says it on Wiretap. He says it. He says it in Marion, Illinois, visits between he and I. He says, John, there weren't many doors open to me. The only door was open was the one I went through, which brought me to where I am today. And I would look at him and, because he's my father, and I would always be respectful and say, I know, Dad, I understand. But that's not what I thought in my mind. I would say, that's not true. It's not true. Yes, it was. And yes, I guess back then, and the glamour and everything else that goes with it. And again, maybe most kids growing up, their idol was Mickey Mantle. My father's idol was Albert Anastasia. Okay? But the point is that you possessed the intelligence. Now, you didn't possess the opportunity like I did. My father struggled, and he moved the money, but he made sure that he put me in military school. He gave me the same education Donald Trump's father gave him. So there's no excuse. I have no excuse.
He wanted you to get out. He didn't want you to pursue the life that he had.
My father wanted me to go to military school and do something spectacular with my life. And I wanted, not quite what my father wanted, I wanted to go on to an ROTC-oriented college and pursue a career in the military. That's what I wanted. And it took a wrong turn at some point, and I ended up where I was. Now, if he asked me, well, John, if your next question is, you have any regrets? We all do at some point. If we live long enough, if we're old enough, we have regrets.
Sure.
But I don't regret being around my father. I don't. I cherish those moments. Look, I'm sorry, but do I miss that life? No. Do I miss John Gotti? You bet. He was something special to be around. That was it. It's unfair to me to describe it to you because everybody's going to watch and say, well, that's your father, that's your father. It's not right. Because I'm doing a show, I'm working on a show right now, and I'm interviewing people that were labeled by the government as shot callers in Marion, Illinois, and other institutions that did time with John Gotti. And I'll let them tell you what kind of a man he was, okay? He was the complete package. Listen, I have two idols in my life. Only two. John Gotti, Nelson Mandela. That's it. That's where it ends. Nobody else impressed me. I'm not impressed. You can't impress me too easily. They impressed me. And for me to have my father, not only because he's my father, but to be my idol, tells you what a special man he was, but for that life. And my view should be the best view, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm not hardcore. There's hardcore guys that don't know any better. They don't know any better. They say, this is what we know. Okay? My political view is I'm a true blue independent. That's what I am. I was a Bill Clinton Democrat, and I can jump right over. I can like Donald Trump. I'm a true blue independent that stays in the middle, and I evaluate a situation, not the politics. I evaluate the situation, I evaluate the person, and I can make a choice where I believe it's out my best interest, my children's best interest, where we should be. I can make that evaluation, okay? Not where maybe like my father being a hardcore guy says, it's cut and dry. This is who we are. Or his statement that he had made to me when I visited him, that last visit we ever had together was, when a man chooses a path and he walks down that path, to be a man, you have to see that walk to the end. You have to stay on that path all the way to the end. I don't agree with that. Circumstances change. Everything changes. So me being a true blue independent, my perspectives go, I could evaluate. And I'm telling you from the outside looking in. Okay, now I'm on the outside now looking in. What kind of a man my father was. I know his flaws and I know his qualities. His qualities outweigh the flaws, and his qualities regarded to being a hoodlum, they're through the roof.
You're going to think I'm crazy when I tell you this, but the last 13 and a half years, I've been working on my first fiction book to write, ever. Fiction book to write. And while I finished this book, a year ago, I got the strangest phone call about one of the characters in the book where the guy wanted to meet with me, and he read the book. And afterwards, was like, wait a minute, am I the villain in the book? This is a story about a character named Asher, who is half Armenian, half Assyrian, whose father was involved in the Iranian Revolution, linked to Savak, working with the Shah, that they escape and he gets recruited to a secret society. When you go to the secret society, it's been around for a couple thousand years. They've developed some of the craziest leaders of all time. And they test you. There's unique tests that they have at the society where they test to see your emotional mental toughness. One of the tests that they have is very rigorous. It's purely mental. Of course, there's a physical one, but one is mental and emotional. If you're Armenian, if you're Syrian, if you're Persian, this is a book you're going to be reading and saying, holy moly, this is the kind of stuff you talk about in here? Yes. If you're somebody that's fascinated by history, this is a book for you. Characters. There's a technology that this society, secret society, builds where you go into a vault. I won't spoil it for you. When you go down, they have a technology where you get to sit down and watch and have a 3-4 hour conversation with Tupac. You can set up a debate between Karl Marx and Ayn Rand. Karl Marx is in the book, who wrote Communist Manifesto. Ayn Rand, who wrote Atlas Shrugged, is in the book. Marilyn Monroe explains the concept of seduction and sex in the book. When you read the book, it's about development of the next leaders in the world and how they do it and how they've been doing it for many years. And it's also about how to prevent the end of civilization and how this organization goes about doing it. So, I've never written a parenting book before, but if I ever wrote a parenting book, this is the closest thing to it because it's all mindset, a lot of crazy stories. Again, 13 and a half years. Trust me, I told myself I will not publish this book until I sell my insurance company and I'm fully disconnected from it, where it's no longer my responsibility 100%. When you read this, if you're a creative person, if you like fiction books, if you enjoyed Atlas Shrugged, or if you enjoy Divergent, if you like books like that, I think you're gonna enjoy reading this book. It's the creative side. Business books is very easy. Here's how you do it. Here's how this how it works. This is very creative. If you haven't placed the order yet, now you can order it on Simon & Schuster, Amazon. I'm gonna put the link up below somewhere here, maybe even in my profile. Go order the book and read it. I've never written a book where I can't wait to read your reviews to see what you think about this book. So I'm going on this wild journey, and we have some plans with this book here. If you support the things that I work on, I would appreciate you going and reading the book, order the book on Amazon, and then post a review.
When's the last time you hugged him?
February 5th, 1999. I was granted a visit, which wasn't supposed to be a visit. It was supposed to be a phone call because I refused to take a plea on the case. And I took the plea on the case. Well, I wanted to see my father, and I wanted to be declared a civilian. I wanted to be put on a shelf for the rest of my life. And I sent him a message up earlier, and he evaluated that message. And when I walked into that visit, he came right at me. I gave him a hug first. Well, it's really interesting to tell you because you'll enjoy this story. Because, again, it goes to the persona of John Gotti, okay? Not me. I wouldn't have done it this way, but he did. I'm there, and a marshal escorts me, okay, to visit my father now. And at first, the prosecution, Southern District in White Plains, they refused to have me and my father in the same room. Prosecutor gets up and says that we communicate in a code that the CIA would have a hard time cracking. They can't be in the same room. She's telling Barrington Parker, Judge Barrington Parker, this. And he says, nonsense. Under the same provisions that he's seen him in Marion, Illinois, he could see his father. Now, the problem was USP Springfield wasn't qualified to create those provisions, to create that booth, the glass, everything else. So they had to put us in a conference room. And we had to sit across the table, a wide table, and it was a tripod set up, it videotaped the whole thing. Okay, the whole thing. And I get there, and the marshal walks me in and excuses himself, and the lieutenant and captain of the prison come in and greet me, and I shake their hand. How are you? Your father's being brought down right now, and he's dying of cancer. This is February 5th, 99, as I'd said. He had the surgeries, his jaw's missing, half his tongue is missing, half his pec is gone. He's down to maybe 160 pounds, 165 pounds. He comes down, he's belly chained and all shackled, and I hear the chains moving in the hall. He's coming down. He's doing the stutter step dance, because the only way he can walk with the ankle chains on. And there's about 8 or 9 guards around him. They're bringing him, they're transporting him. But right before he comes into the room, 2 FBI agents dip into the room. And I'm looking at them, and they're dressed in suits, comes over and they identify themselves. They're from the Springfield, Mass office, and they hold their hand out. I shake their hands. And he says, Mr. Gotti, we're going to be sitting in on the visit between you and your father. And I says, I don't think so. And they says, well, I said, look, I don't have a problem with you sitting in and listening. My father won't sit in the room with you people. I'm just telling you ahead of time. I'm a gentleman in this respect, but he's not going to be in this respect. I'm just telling you right now. He says, well, we're going to have to. And all of a sudden, like on cue, now I hear the chains coming, and he comes in. And he sees me, and he smiles. He's all shackled up, and I'm heartbroken. I'm crushed. I see him now. It's the first time I saw him. If his face is missing, and I'm crushed. And I'm looking at him. I'm just staring at him, and he's belly chained, and taking the chains off his feet. And he looks over, and he goes, he gives me a smile, and he goes, who are these 2 gentlemen? And the fellow walks over, how are you doing? I'm special agent, such and such. My boss says, no, pull your hand back. He said, what do you want? He says, we're going to sit in. Take me out of here. Take me out of here. He's backing out. He says, John, it's great seeing you. These men can never sit in the room with me. He backs out. And then the captain jumps up and says, no. We have an order. We have a court order. Courts, Federal Judge Barrington Parker. Nowhere in this order does it say you're to be in this room. You have to leave. This visit has to proceed. It's a 90-minute visit. It's allowed, authorized by a federal judge. You have to leave. And they left. And he wouldn't even sit in the room. He wouldn't even sit in the room with these individuals. He wouldn't sit in the room. And at that visit, that's when I had the opportunity to hug him. So at that moment, they left the room. They unchained my father. A lieutenant stood in the room with the tripod for the camera, because he had to operate the camera. And I was allowed to walk around the table, and I was allowed to give him 1 hug, which I didn't want to let go. And then I went to my side of the table, and I had to sit, and we had our visit. We had our 90-minute visit, which was memorialized by that tape, which the government refused to acknowledge that it even existed until I was about to be granted a hearing. And then they started turning over evidence that I knew they had, stuff that they had. What made that visit so important was the fact that he opens the conversation, some niceties, and I'm telling him, he's telling me about a surgery, and then you look great, John, and I'm saying, Dad, but why this, why that? And you could see I'm a bit emotional. And then he goes on to tell me about how he feels a man should comport himself and so on. Then he goes and says, well, Joseph says John wants closure. Now, Joseph was an attorney who came to see my father and basically gave my father my message. Now, if I tell you I want closure, Pat, what would you take that to mean? Would you take it to mean that I want closure, I want to move on with my life, I want to do something different with my life?
Different with your life.
What you thought I was, what you thought it was, that reality is no more a reality. So I wanted to move on. And it was my way of telling my father, if I win my case, I'm going home, I want to be a civilian. If I lose my case, I'll do my 20-some-odd years, and I'm going home to be a civilian. That's it. You're my cause. You're my cause. Maybe that was your cause, but you are my cause, okay? You're dying. I hope and pray you live. I hope you pray and live you 20, 30 more years. And if that's the case, you know what? I would have been in that world still today. I'd be in that life today.
You told him this? Or you're thinking this?
I'm thinking, and the message that was brought to him was of such.
How did you give it to him, though?
It was sent. It was sent to him.
So before he's had that 90-minute visit with you, that the federal... So before, he knew you're coming in to have that conversation with him?
He knew I was having that conversation.
Was he disappointed?
A bit. But he opens the conversation by saying, Joseph said John wants closure. And he said, that word is not in my son's vocabulary. He goes on to talk about it. And then he's telling me... And then we're having our conversation, and we communicate in the way we know how to communicate, my father and I. We can feed off each other, okay? And, at that point, he's letting me know his feelings, and I'm sort of letting him know my feelings. I tell him about my son, John Gotti, and I'm telling him about his other grandson, John Gotti. And I'm saying, what's your hope and expectations for them? This is me now, and I'm expendable. But are they expendable? Are your grandkids expendable? So when do we stop this? At what point do you think you're my cause? If you're going to be here forever, then I'm here with you. I'm with you. I said I'd follow you off a cliff, and I'm going to die with you. Okay? But if you're dying, I see it.
You're telling him this.
I'm not. He understands where I'm going with this, and my body language is telling him. And he's like, he's opening up his jumpsuit and he's going like this, and I'm looking. And I remember when they said they first gave him 120 days to live. He had stage 4 of squamous head and neck cancer, very aggressively moving, and they gave him 120 days to live. He ultimately lived almost 4 years. But we knew what they were going to do. We knew how the cancer materialized. We knew how it matured. We know how it got there. The government did it. They did it. He had infections in his mouth from his implants. They took away his commissary where he was able to drink bottled water. They took it away from him. And they made him drink and brush his teeth in water from Marion, Illinois, which you can pull up. There's Amnesty International had done a report on Crab Orchard Lake. The prison was built on this Crab Orchard Lake, on its old abandoned coal mines. The waters are highly carcinogenic, and they should tell us when we come in, drink from the filtered fountains, and the inmates was recommended to drink bottled water. Well, because John owed a fine of $250,000 and refused to pay not one nickel to them, not even $25 a month would he give them, okay? They took his commissary. So he could no longer use the bottled water, so now he's forced with loose implants, because remember, you develop gum disease from lack of vitamin D. You're in solitary confinement at that point, 6 years. 6 years in solitary confinement, no sun. No sun. So his implants became weakened. He had gum disease, infections, open wounds. Now you're making him drink that water from the sink in his cell, highly carcinogenic, okay, within a year. One bump appears, then the second bump appears, then the third bump appears. Now, the physician's assistant, they don't even have a doctor see you. A doctor doesn't even see you. They send the physician's assistant to see you in Marion, and you got to check you through the bars. You can't leave your cell, they're checking you through the bars. Physician's assistant's name was Zuko. He's out of Indiana. I have his reports. He issued his reports that these are suspicious. They ignored it. A month goes by. He issues another report. New tumor growing, very suspicious. They ignore it. Finally, he makes a formal complaint. He was a really good guy, a solid guy, this physician's assistant in Marion, Zuko. And they fired him. He said, something's wrong with this guy. He doesn't have a throat infection. He's got tumors growing all over his neck, all growing out of his neck. They told him, you know what? You're taking too much of a personal interest with John Gotti, and they fired him. And ultimately, in the end, we got an attorney to force them to bring him out. And then that's when they diagnosed him, stage 4 head and neck aggressive squamous cell cancer. And they said it was too late. He had 120 days to live. They did a radical surgery, 36 radiations, which is the maximum allotted. Took part of his jaw, took part of his tongue, everything out. And basically, this is the beauty part. After doing all of that, I had that visit with my father, and a short time later, they took him right back to Marion, Illinois, and dumped him right back in solitary confinement to die.
Why?
Because he's John Gotti, and they could.
For no reason.
No reason. Listen, my father never committed you go to Marion, Illinois for one reason and one reason only. You commit an infraction in the Bureau of Prisons, meaning. There's a step program here. The lowest, there's camps in the federal system, then there's 1s, 2s, 3s. I was in most of my bid in disciplinary 4s. 5 is a penitentiary, okay? And then after penitentiary, that's the maximum security in America. There's only one level 6 in the country. That was Marion at that time, okay? John was a court committal, straight from the courts, right to Marion, Illinois, right to a level 6, without committing one single infraction, only because of his popularity with other inmates. They felt he'd be a threat to security, okay? And I guess, try to break him. They brought him to Marion, locked him in solitary confinement for years, left him like that, just like that, okay? So that in itself should tell you, that this is a direct court committal. You only go to Marion, Illinois if you stab somebody when you're in a penitentiary, take hostages, you escape. There's levels. You have to graduate to those levels. So a 4, if I was to hurt somebody in the 4, I'm going to the penitentiary to 5. If the 5 is the maximum, that's the end of the road. How do we discipline you now? If you're in a 5, they have their own solitary confinement, because I did time. I was in Lewisburg in the hole there and in Atlanta. But that's the buck stops there. Next thing is this. Oh, that's not going to faze you? Well, now we're taking you to Marion now. That keeps you in check. Okay? That's where all the hardest of the hardcore end up in Marion, Illinois. All the shot callers for all the major organizations, the jailhouse, prison gangs, whatever, that's where they end up. Marion, Illinois is the end of the road. That's where it is. The most violent of the violent. Okay? Or the escape risks.
Did anybody try to go after your father just for street cred or no?
Someone sucker punched him in chains. And I don't know how much time we have. Believe me, we can talk.
I'm good. Yeah.
We could talk about this forever.
Some sucker punched him?
Yeah.
And what happened to the guy that did?
He got what he wanted. And here's what he wanted, okay? He was a sick individual. This guy's name was Walter Johnson was his name, Walter Johnson. And he was from the Philadelphia area. He was a black gangbanger. And he was on the same floor, the tier with the DC Blacks. The DC Blacks are known throughout the federal system. A lot of them are Muslims.
DC Blacks?
Yeah, known as the DC Blacks. A lot of them are known throughout the federal system. Very popular, very large prison organization. A lot of them are Muslims. What they did was he was in with the DC Blacks, and they began to pull his card. He was basically making statements that he was with the DC group, he was affiliated throughout the federal system, and they were now in the process of checking him out. And they were about to pull his card. So he wanted to get off that floor before they kill him. So who's the most notorious guy in the prison at that time is John Gotti. So for you to be moved to get a little bit of rec, okay, they only move you get chained up and you move to a rec area, and then you get unchained in that rec area, and you're allowed to be with a certain amount of inmates at one time. This is later on. When my father first got there, he was in K dorm, which is deadlocked by yourself for several years, and you have to evolve to be able to even go into the yard. But you're not leaving Marion unless you sign that paper. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't never leaving Marion. But now he's evolved to D unit, D block, and then C block. A little bit more room you have there, a little bit more social. Other shot callers could be with you. While they were uncuffing him, Walter's already in the yard. He uncuffing, and he nails my father. He steals the punch, and they come right down. They dropped him immediately, and he got boated out of the prison immediately what he wanted. So he got his life saved.
Wow.
He got boated out because he knew the DC Blacks were going to pull his card and they were going to kill him. And they boated him right out of
Did they ever kill him somewhere else or no?
No. He ended up in the hole, never came out, never hit population, got released from prison. This is a great story. Can't make this up. Got released from prison a couple of years later, and as soon as he gets out, he goes and gets himself a shotgun. Because it wouldn't be right. Gets a shotgun and he's going to kill a girl that he believed testified against him. He jumps over a turnstile in the subway. A transit authority cop stops him. He pulls out the gun and kills the cop. And he ended up someplace else, I think in the system, I don't know where. And I'm not sure if he's even alive today. But,
what a story.
Yeah.
Walter Johnson.
And there were players in the Aryan Brotherhood, there were players in Lame that wanted to hit him. They couldn't get to him.
It's kind of like one of those things where it's like, hey, but I thought it would be more from the standpoint of, I'm the new tough guy. Let me tell you what I did. It wasn't for that. It was for a different reason.
He checked himself. That's the honorable way of checking yourself into the hole. You know when someone they call you a rat or they pull your card and they tell you, listen, you can go up there right now and knock on that door and check yourself into the hole because they want you removed from the compound or we're going to kill you.
Or they let you do that.
Well, we were in Raybrook. If a guy was no good, had bad paperwork, we would tell the guy, look, come here. Here's what you're going to do. Go get your stuff. Go up and knock on the CO's door and tell him to take you off the compound now. Otherwise, you're going to get taken.
Got it.
So he removed himself from the compound. So what he did was, this is Marion. Marion is just where the buck stops. This is where the most dangerous is dangerous.
Is this the guy?
That's him. That's him right there. He's about 6'4", 6'5", 26 years old, hitting a guy with cancer, 57 years old. He sucker punched him with cuffs on. And I got the actual report. Okay, we're doing a show on this. And we're going to publish all the reports and the eyewitness statements that were taken and whatnot.
Wow. And you don't know if he's alive or not. You don't know where he's at.
No, I don't know where he is today. But it's an interesting story. So by doing that, he saved his own life. The DC Blacks couldn't get to him. And he got moved off the compound. He got moved someplace else, and that's it.
Wow. So a question, that last meeting, February 5th, 99, okay, your father passes away 3 years later, which is what, June 10th of 02, I think, right?
02.
02, right.
61 years old, June 10th of 02.
Right, June 10th of 02.
Right.
Have you ever seen that recording? Because I know it was being recorded.
Yeah, I have it. I have it, and we used it as evidence in our trial, in my last case.
So you have you ever sit there and watch a conversation between you and your dad?
It's emotional to watch it now.
I can only imagine.
On my own time, look, when I'm missing him, I'll have a couple of scotches by myself. I'll pop that DVD in, and I love seeing John Gotti be John Gotti. I love seeing him be John Gotti. That's it. I love him, and from here up, he's the old John Gotti. You could see it in his eyes. He came to life on that visit. Like he's lecturing me a bit, and then all of a sudden, he looks at me, and he says, "You know something, John?" He says, "What I wouldn't do. One more time. And all of a sudden his eyes get wide like a lion about to pounce on prey. One more time to go in that courtroom and teach these fucking punks what a man is all about. To show them what a man is all about. What I wouldn't do, John, one more time, he says, and show these fucking guys what this means. He says, you show them, John. You got to show them. I didn't agree with him. I didn't want to become the Teflon Don. I didn't want to. I wanted to take the plea. I forfeited many millions of dollars. They destroyed every business I had. And I figured, and I trusted, and I thought, and again, this conversation is going to almost make us roll into another conversation. So just so you know, because there's so much, you need 10 hours to complete this story. I'm just explaining something to you. So that, his words were, you beat them, you send them packing, they'll never come back. They'll never come back. And I said, Dad, I don't agree with you. He says, that nonsense, they'll never come back, John. Tighten their asses up, they'll never come back. These mutts will never come back, he said. And maybe he was right, but I believe this. He was right in the respect that I said, if I take the plea, I'm not you, Dad. They don't want me. I'm not you. I'll forfeit whatever they need. I'll be home in 7 years. I can raise my children and we can move on. He says, John, these are his words and they're prophetic. In this respect, he was right. He says, John, once they get you in, they're not letting you go. I says, no, Dad, they don't want me. I'm nobody. I'm not a threat to them. You're John Gotti. I'm not. I'm just John Gotti. That's it. I'm the guy who opened the door, who held the door open for John Gotti. And no, he said, once they get you in, John, they're never letting you go. And he was right. They got me in. I took that plea. And I said, I fought a couple of subpoenas while I was in prison. I fought a couple of subpoenas. Because remember, what led us to that point, I had 2 indictments. I beat one from the bench, and I'm pleading on this one. I'm using this one to take all the guns away from my head. And I had both U.S. attorneys. When did you ever see that? The representative shot caller for the Eastern District, representative shot caller for the Southern District in the same courtroom, and both stood up. Now, here's my legal team. Jerry Shargell, one of the greatest trial attorneys in New York history. Bruce Cutler, he's my 3rd seat. My 2nd seat is Charlie Ogletree, Nelson Mandela's attorney here in the States, who helped rewrite the Constitution of South Africa. Now, I have a dream team. I got power. I've got personality, okay? I'm ready to go to war, okay? That being said, he recently passed away, bless his heart. But I'm ready, and my father knew I just beat them. We just beat one case. They got caught in wrongdoing. They got caught. A special prosecutor got fired for creating leaks on my cases. A special agent got fired and rezoned, maybe to Juneau, Alaska, for destroying evidence because his witness was a pedophile, destroying evidence, shredding notes and destroying evidence. And a special state prosecutor got fired for leaking and destroying evidence. Now, when did you ever see that on one case? 3 different elements all got fired for misconduct in my first case. So I beat the first case. This is spilling into the second case. So my father believed that I had them. He said, John, you got them. This is it. You caught them in misconduct. You did everything you were supposed to do. I'm proud of you. Now finish it. Take them to trial and break their holes and send them packing. And I didn't see it that way. I said, I'm going to be, and I knew I could beat the case. I knew I could beat that case. And I said to myself, I says, but to what end? If I win, I can't move on with my life. I have to remain who I am. And I become, in their words, their eyes, the Teflon Don. I become it. I just beat them and I beat them in 87. So I'm on a roll. I beat them in 87. I beat them in 89. I just beat them a case now in 98. Now if I beat this 4th case in a row, I said, I'm the Teflon Don. I can't get out anymore. I'm trapped. And I didn't agree with my father. And I left that prison misrepresenting to him. I said, I'm going to fight. You're right, Dad. You're right. You're right. That's right. That's right. And then when I went home and I saw my daughter, and I got a little emotional talking to my daughter, and she says, she was at that time, she was about 8 or 9 years old. And I looked at her and I says, these kids are lost. I had spoke to my oldest boy and I says, if I fall and get life, they're done. They're done. If I give them 7 more years, my wife can hold it down for 7 more years. She'll hold it down for me. And my brother, my immediate family will hold it down for me. I'll get home and I'll get things on track here. Not just for my family, because remember, my father put his whole family on my shoulders. My mother, in essence, who's my mother, I adore her, but in essence, she became my wife. I've got to hear her complaints. I've got to, make sure everything's okay for my mother. My sisters became my daughters. Okay? My brother became my son. My father's grandkids became mine. I mean, just everything fell on. I had to deal with all these different problems. So I thought we had it under control. I thought it was going to be a great thing. And I said, you know what? He's got this wrong. I'm going to take this plea. I had to forfeit $2.5 million. You know what $2.5 million? You want to put that number up? $2.5 million in 1999. What is that in today's U.S. dollars today?
$7 million.
Okay? I forfeited $2.5 million plus property, 50 acres upstate, 90 acres in Pennsylvania, a building. They destroyed my business.
$5 million today.
Okay, $5 million. It's like you're writing a check for $5 million today. I forfeited all of that. They destroyed my phone business. I had Penn Station on lockdown. They took my whole business, destroyed all my companies. My brokerage company took everything apart. They dismantled it. I gave it all up, and I said, you know what? Fortunes are won and lost every day. I'll come home. I'll rebuild. I still got enough. I could be okay. I'll give them another seven years, and I'll be home, and I'll rebuild. No problem at all. But I'll rebuild completely and totally as a civilian. That's what I thought. And I was only several weeks from being released from prison, and John Gotti's prophetic words came to fruition. Because remember, we had both U.S. attorneys saying that it's no longer in the interest of us with this plea, the resolution of the case. We're done with him, basically, in essence. They promised me. And then James Comey, Donald Trump's tormentor, indicted me. He indicted me. James Comey. James Comey indicted me. James Comey's office indicted me right before I was about to be released. They charged me with the Curtis Lee with kidnapping and attempted murder. And now I was facing 110 years. So only weeks. Think about the psychological impact of this, okay? I'm weeks from being released. I gave away my stuff. My fan, all my, I'm a guy with a few dollars. So I had some nice things in prison that I've accumulated. So I gave it all away. I gave nice things away, my sweatsuits, things that I've accumulated over time. That's my life day. Prison becomes your life. I've given it all away. I'm about to go home. And I have a list of all the names of my dear brothers in there who don't have anything. So when I get home, I'm going to start sending them money on their commissary. I'm ready to go home. But I was guarded. I would talk to my wife. My wife would tell me, when you come home, I said, don't speak like that. Don't speak like that in front of the kids. When I'm home, I'm home. When I walk in that door, that's when I know I'm home. But until then, these these bastards can come at any time, any moment. And sure enough, they did. Several weeks before my releasal, they came in, they indicted me in that case, and that started. From the end of that case to the last case, in 37 months, I got indicted 5 times.
Wow.
And the last one, I was facing the death penalty. I was housed in the death unit in Pinellas County for 6 months until I won the motion. I was moved over. I spent 17 months in solitary confinement.
What was it for?
For nothing, to torture me. They put me in there to break me, to try to break me. Okay? Listen, the things they did, the tactic they employed against me is so unethical. But then again, knowing the adversary and knowing how the adversary presents itself, it certainly is ethical for them because they're hypocrites. They'll tell you, look at the mob guy and look at how bad the mob guy is and so on and so forth. But I got to tell you, I've never seen treachery in any street guy or any mob element that I saw with the United States government. I've never seen that kind of treachery. I've never seen it. You see a guy showing up for trial every single day. You see a guy hawking and selling his diamond watches off his wrist selling homes and businesses, getting hard money loans on his home. My home had no mortgage when I went to prison. My building that I owned had no mortgage on that. Those are assets left to my wife and my kids. By the second trial, I had a $1.3 million mortgage on my home, and the building was already sold off to pay for the third and fourth trials, okay? My assets were gone. I came home busted and broke after the fifth case. 15 years ago, last week I came home. Broke. I got myself right.
How did you make money, John? What'd you do?
Wrote a book. I wrote a 600-page book on my own. Nobody wrote it for me. No ghostwriter. I had written the book myself. I had a lawyer friend of mine who did the editing and typing for me. I don't know how to type. I did everything by longhand. I gave him all the pads, and he typed and edited for me, and I wrote the book by myself. That was a start. Sold those rights to create the Gotti movie, which I made some money on that, and used those monies and invested and moved it along the right way. Helped out in some projects. I'm doing several projects of my own right now, but I got myself right. But to watch the government sit there and take a position, and you see what I'm going through. You went to banks, had them throw me out, had my wife ostracized from lending institutions. Nobody would give me a loan. Even after the hard money guys, they were calling and subpoenaing the hard money guys. They started subpoenaing all my banks, all the lending institutions, so everybody threw us out. We were homeless. Basically, we had no banks to go to. The special agent on my case would follow my wife into the supermarket and tell her, tell your husband to flip, because if he doesn't flip, what's going to happen is your kids are going to be homeless. And she would tell him, fuck off and whatever have you, and that would be that, okay? But this is the tactic they employed against me. Subpoenaed my sister, subpoenaed my brother, subpoenaed all my witnesses, harassed them, sent a rat with a wire on to my mother who's lying in a hospital bed after brain surgery. Wired up on my mother to try to get incriminating information against me.
Wow.
This is the tactic that they employed. And then, if you can space it all out, and for us to sit here and walk it through process by process, date by date, would be, you won't make it home tonight for dinner. I can promise you won't, but I can tell you this much. That was the beginning where I told you, which culminated in the end, the fifth trial, which the result was the same, okay, on that trial. But to watch what these guys did along that way, they played very fair the first trial. Held me without bail, held me in 10 South, the terrorist unit that was built for Ramzi Youssef and Sheikh Khalid, the guys who bombed the World Trade Center in 1993. Okay, it was built for them, only 6 cells in 10 South. That's where they housed me for that first trial. Then when the judge got the opportunity to see the evidence and see all the particulars, we won her over. She released me on bail. She then released me on bail. And then she began to turn on the government, and she started seeing the case for the reality of what it was. And we started winning motions, tapes, wiretaps that they didn't want in, that they made of me in prison, and legal visits. They violated out my rights and wiretapped my legal visits. These recordings were now all coming into play. All this stuff is now being allowed in. And I knew after that they would never be able to beat me again, because these tapes exonerated me. They made them, spent millions to make them, and then yet went to suppress them by changing the indictment, dropping the indictment, superseding it, and indicting me 2 years earlier, so not to use tapes that they made in 2004. Okay? This is the tactic they employed against me.
They're brilliant. Brilliant, manipulative, deceptive.
Yeah.
They're the ultimate gangsters, if you think about it, like what they do. I got 2 last things I want to talk to you about before we wrap up. One is, story comes out this last week. It could have been 2 weeks ago, about a story of O.J. Simpson, a guy named John Denton. I don't know if you saw this or not. Police
John
witness.
Denton? No.
He says, a key witness claims O.J. hired Gambino family to kill his wife. Do you know anything about the story or not?
That's absurd. God.
Okay, so this one you don't know about.
Any real legitimate guy would have been amused by that.
Okay.
Come on.
And the other story, John Alite. What's your relationship with him?
I haven't seen John Alite since 1991. I haven't seen that guy since 1991. I haven't seen him, okay? He professed to be my right-hand man. I don't want to tell you the reality of who he is and what he is. I don't want to do that because he lost a daughter recently. And to me, I know even I knew his wife. I knew his wife's got to be someplace mourning right now. I know she has to be. I know that. She was a pretty good person. And I know even he has to be mourning someplace right now. So I'm not going to tell you the reality. Maybe at some other point, maybe at some other date. But to me, to sit here now, one thing I will never do I never kick somebody when they're hurting. I won't do that. I won't do that. And I saw what happened to my mother. I saw what happened to my father when they lost Frankie Boy, my brother. I saw, and I know they have to be feeling the same way. So I will not kick them. I won't do that. I will never kick her. I won't kick him. I won't address it, and I won't elaborate. I won't go any further on that. But, just now to get off that subject onto a different subject, again, the tactic employed by the United States government and the things they've done to me, okay? Look, I'm bitter. I hate them. I don't hate any of the cooperators that went against me. I don't hate any of them. I won. They got to look in the mirror. They know what they did, and it was a futile attempt.
You hate them? You hate the U.S. government?
I'm going to get there. It was a futile attempt on their part. I won. I'm home. Christmas. I'll be home tomorrow putting up my tree with my wife, okay? I'll be home, okay? They got to look in the mirror knowing what they did. I survived them. I'm not mad at them. I'm mad at the United States government for the absolution and the deals that they've made with these lowlifes, knowing exactly what they were, exactly what they were going to do. They knew it. They knew the ramifications of their actions, what were going to happen, and still brought these people against me, freed these individuals to go on and commit a whole host of more crimes thereafter, and the whole time doing what they did to my family, tormenting my mother, tormenting my wife, my siblings, subpoenaing my best friends, economically destroyed me completely and totally. They had the balls, because of a meeting that we had with the United States government in 2005, a 40-minute meeting. They knew the tact I employed there. They knew exactly. I'm going to ask you a question. You interviewed Gravano, right? Okay. When you interviewed Gravano, did Gravano tell you how he became a rat?
No.
Well, one thing I know he definitely didn't tell you. He didn't say that when he decided to become a rat, that next day, he met with John Gotti, he met with Frank Licasio, and some other powerful figures in organized crime, and he told them that, look, guys, I'm going to go in tomorrow and do a proffer, and I want to become a government cooperator. Wish me luck. And they all hit him on the back and told him, good luck, I hope it works out for you. I don't think that happened, right? You don't think that happened, right?
No.
Okay.
But I also don't think he thinks he was a rat in his eyes.
Oh, God. Well,
his eyes. He doesn't because
I guess the 70 families he destroyed, 57 people he put in jail, 70 people he destroyed. I guess the children the women that were widowed, basically in essence, for life had empty beds and their children on Christmas and holidays with no father and so on. He didn't do any of that stuff. But here's my point that I'm getting at. It's interesting for you, Pat, because the government called me a rat. The government called me a rat. The most tried man in the history of America. No man, no accused organized crime member was ever tried more than me. Look it up. Find those statistics. Got a great technology guy right here, technologist right here. Look it up. See, I've been indicted in my life 9 times. I went to trial 8 times. Never lost a trial. I went to prison 1 time because I pled guilty. But in 37 months from stop to start, I was indicted 5 times, 5 federal proceedings. From the beginning to the end, culminating with me facing the death penalty, which the government, when I won the motion and we moved from Pinellas County, Florida to New York, they opted not to charge me. And I dared them to pursue the death charge because they had to give me a free defense. They would have had to give me a $2 million budget to defend myself. I dared them to charge me with the death penalty. They dropped it. And I was broke at that point, so my lawyers had to work on oil and gas. I had to keep things moving, and I had to pay those bills eventually. But still, we remedied the case, but yet they had the audacity, because of a 40-minute meeting that I had with them, that according to their cooperators, now think about this for a second, I told you, Sammy Gravano never went to all these different personalities and told these personalities that I'm thinking about going and becoming a cooperator, and tomorrow morning I'm going to be debriefed tomorrow. Wish me luck, guys, right? Well, I did that meeting. I did a meeting for 40 minutes. Took 2 attorneys with me, 2 attorneys.
When you met with the
Feds.
And that's where...
An agent.
Right.
An agent and a prosecutor and an assistant prosecutor at the courthouse. I went to that meeting. I called for that meeting. I did it. I orchestrated it. Not my lawyers, not them. I did it. I said, I want to meet with them. My lawyer said to me, what do you want to do? You just make the meeting. You just make the meeting. They says, no, John, please. You just make, I pay you, you don't pay me. Make the meeting. I know what I'm doing here. I got this. Don't worry about it. He said, John, if you're going to become a rat, please let me know so I can get out of here. Listen, just make the meeting. I got this. Okay? Now, according to 3 different cooperators, 2 mainly testified against me, and a 3rd cooperator that never testified against me, but he was the most powerful of all the cooperators. Okay? They all said that this is what happened. Before I went in, they said I had a meeting, a clandestine meeting in prison with Vinnie Gorgeous Basciano. They accused him of being the acting boss of the Bonanno family. Really good man, solid guy. Never knew him on the streets, never met him on the streets. But I met him in prison. And they said while we were in the bullpen together, he and I, that he followed my lead. I hatched a plan that I was going to go in and do what's called an innocence proffer. An innocence proffer, and go in to establish an alibi, and I was going to testify on my own behalf in my trials. And he suggested that he would do it as well. He said to me, I'm going to follow your lead. This is not according to me. This is according to the government cooperators. He referred to me, says, John, I'm going to follow your lead. What you do, I'm going to do. Okay? Now, they also went on to say that before I went in, this was cleared with Vinnie Basciano. They said it, not me. Steve Vittabile is accused of being for 30 years the number 3 guy in the Cavalcanti family in New Jersey. Joe Arcuri, elder statesman, wonderful man, who they claim was on the panel ruling the Gambino crime family. Alphonse Siska, who they accused him of being a high-ranking captain in the Gambino family. Arnold Squitieri, who the government accused of being the acting boss of the Gambino family. And Joe Messina. Now, Joe Messina verified it. Joe Messina, again, he was confessed boss of the Bonanno family, ultimately flipped. I loved Joe like an uncle. He made my cake when I went away to military school when I was 14 years old for me. He owned a bakery. His family, I knew his family very well. His wife, wonderful person. I knew his daughters. They were a beautiful family. But yet, this is the government cooperators saying, I sent these messages, and they all had different input. Vittabile supported it. Arcuri supported it. Basciano was on board and doing it with me, according to government cooperators. Arnold Squitieri did not support it. Alphonse Siska did not support it. Joe Messina at first had reservations, sent a message back to me, which he did. He sent a lawyer to see me, and the lawyer would verify it. The lawyer was, tell him, I love him. He's going to be perceived as a rat. My response back was, go back and tell Joe, I love him right back. I'm a civilian. I had my father put me on the shelf, okay? I'm a civilian. I march to the beat of my own drum. I'm showing respect for my father's life. I'm showing respect for people that I adore, that I love. I'm giving them that respect, but I don't have to. I could fight as a civilian. As long as nobody gets hurt, as long as not one person gets a subpoena as a result of anything I do, as long as not one person, if a person got indicted for something I said in my life, I would kill myself. I would rather do 100 years in prison if I destroyed a family like these rats destroyed my family or tried to destroy my family, okay? I would do 100 years in prison for that would happen. So I told him, my answer to Joe Messina was this. Joe, he was like an uncle to me. Joe, I'm a civilian. I'm not sure if my Uncle Pete clued you in or anybody else, but the chief put me on the shelf for life as per my request in 1999. As per my request, my chief put me on the shelf for life. I can defend myself any way I see fit, as long as nobody gets hurt by anything I say or do inside or outside of the courtroom, okay? But there's more to this, I said. But understand this. I will never, ever embarrass my father. I know I'll beat these people. I know how to beat these people. I'm going to fight this my way and only my way. So, as a result of that meeting, here's what happens. They crafted a 302. And I'm sure Gravano told you he has 302s, right? Any other cooperative, you craft 302s. In Gravano's case, there's hundreds and hundreds of them, okay? In any of these cooperatives, there's hundreds and hundreds of them, okay? In mine, I think there's 4 pages. I memorialized it for you. Yeah, you guys have an Elmo?
Oh, no, we don't.
I'm dating
myself. We'll take a picture and show it. I know what an Elmo is.
An Elmo is
we like Elmos.
An Elmo is something that you have in court to give an exhibit, okay? This is the lead page of that 302. So this should dictate, you read a book. The start better be very good, or you're not going to read the rest of it, and the ending better finish really well. Or you're going to reflect back and say, I didn't really enjoy that book at all, okay? Right? Okay. So let's just go with the start of the book, and any other questions you could ask me in between, I can answer them right now. I'm prepared to answer them on the spot, because I did tell David Gallard to make sure, tell Patrick, please, I know he's a very thorough interviewer, research me carefully, ask me any question. I've got nothing to hide. As long as it's a question he's going to ask me doesn't affect anybody else but me, doesn't hurt anybody else but me, ask me anything you want to ask me. I will answer it, and I will answer it to the best of my ability, okay? And this is something that to me is nearest and dearest into my heart, because what the government did to me, you mentioned Sonny Francis earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. They had a wiretap of Sonny Francis conspiring to kill me. Why? Because he just said on this wiretap, his driver is wired up, and the driver says, he's talking to the driver and said, I just left a meeting with this violent crew from Queens, okay? And they want to make a move on the kid because you're not supposed to leave the life. They don't like the way he's fighting the case, and you ain't supposed to leave the life. Not that I'm a rat, they don't like the way I'm fighting the case, and he ain't supposed to leave the life, so they want to make a move on him, and I'm giving them my support.
Michael's father is...
Michael's father, Sonny, who's a man's man. I have the utmost respect for him. And this is on a wiretap. The government had this wiretap.
What year is this, John?
This took place in 2006. 2006. I have the actual dates.
A man in his 80s is getting...
Well, watch. It gets better. I'm going to tell you the whole story, and then please come double back to that and come back at me. I'm going to show you something, okay? So they have this wiretap. They call my lawyer and say, we have a credible death threat against your client, John Gotti. Charlie says, well, he happens to be in the office right now. Hold on. He puts it on speakerphone. June Kim is the prosecutor. He says, well, you want to repeat that? John's in the room. He says, well, we have a credible death threat. Do you want to come in and cooperate? I says, I'm going to have Charlie tell you to go fuck your mother. How does that sound? And Charlie said, you heard him, right? And he hung up the phone, and that was the end of it. That was the end of the conversation, right? Now, I think it's them already just pulling on it. Short time later, they know there's a credible death threat, because Sonny, being the gangster that he is, and he was a true blue hoodlum, good guy, hoodlum, giving support because you can't leave the life. But the truth of the matter is, okay, and Michael Francis was going to answer a subpoena. See, Michael, to his credit, Michael Francis, we subpoenaed him. He was going to come to our trial and testify that you can leave the life. Okay? If John wants to leave the life, he could leave the life, but he leaves the life fully knowing what the ramifications of his actions are. It's his choice. He could leave, and they could act if they want to act as upon him leaving.
Makes sense.
And Michael was clear to do this. The FBI went to Michael Francis. They told him, we're going to do a case against you. We're going to investigate you. Don't go help that kid out. He's our public enemy number one. Michael still sent word, to his credit, sent word to Charlie Canisi, if you need me, I'm coming. And that's why I respected him. He took that position. He's a stand-up guy in that respect. He took that position, and I admire that, okay? They didn't intimidate him, okay? That being said, they knew all these particulars. They knew Sonny Francis got caught on wiretap. They were looking to kill me. And his response back is basically that this can get messy because there's a lot of guys loyal to me. A lot of guys loyal to the Gottis. This can trigger a war. Did the FBI give a shit? No, they didn't care. So this is what they did. They made it worse. They one-upped it. They asked me to become a rat, and I refused, so they one-upped it. They put, a short time later, after giving me this death threat, they put on the front page of the New York Post that I'm a rat, that I wanted to be a rat. So they tried to get me killed. So you couldn't convict me. And this all happened after I beat them the first case. They played fair in the first trial. The second trial, now the gloves came off, and they got dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. And this is what they did. They couldn't convict me. They couldn't flip me, so they tried to get me killed. But most of the people that mattered never believed it, and still today don't believe it. The ones who are insignificant do believe it. So, that being said, they tried so hard. This was the report that they said was a rat report, okay? Okay, not a human being got hurt. Not one ever got a subpoena. Not one ever got a case, ever. In fact, so much so, to double back and not to be all over the place because we have a limited amount of time to talk.
No one went to jail because of your 40-minute meeting.
Never.
With the feds.
Never. I would have taken 100 years. I would have taken life. I was a civilian, and I would have taken life before that ever happens, before I ever embarrassed my dead father or my sons. Never would happen. Here's what happened. This is the reality. Okay? This was the report right here. and you got to read this report. I'm going to read it to you, okay? This was part of a 4-page report that the government leaked out. Again, this report, this interview happened in 2005. 13 months later, I talked to you right now for 40 minutes. I asked for a recorder to be in that room. They refused. I came with my own notes. Who does that? I came with notes to the meeting. My lawyers verified it. I came with my own notes. So I talked about what I wanted to talk about. And so they wouldn't put their own spin on what I wanted to talk about, I asked for a recorder. They denied the recorder because it's not part of policy. In fact, the only U.S. attorney to ever institute a policy where you're allowed to have a recorder when a 302 is being created was a guy named, I think, Paul K. Stern out of Arizona, Mid-District of Arizona, and the Justice Department fired him for doing that because they don't want recorders in there. They want to be able to basically script a story that they can have a witness follow along to, okay? So they don't want to have it made solid memorialization to a recording. So Paul K. Stern did that. That's what happened. So they wouldn't record it. This is the report. Here's where we go. I'm going to start with it. The date it was made in, the interview took place. If I tell you, if you were to have a conversation today for 40 minutes, right? And I ask you 13 months later, verbatim, tell me what I said. Could you?
No.
I don't think you could, right?
No.
Okay. So we had the meeting. 13 months later, this is the product. 13 months later, they made this report as that 1 40-minute meeting, okay, on notes that I came in with. I came in with those notes, a recording that I asked for that they did not provide the recorder, okay? And here's what comes out of it. It's the first page. So let's go with the first page. It says that John Gotti Jr. and my attorneys, just the attorneys' names, Jeff Littman and Mark Furnich came into a meeting, and it says the murder of Danny Silver. So that's where it starts. The whole report starts, the murder of Danny Silver. In the early morning hours of either March 11th or 12th, 1983, Gotti Jr., along with his friends, were present. I'd rather leave their names out of the situation because these are civilian people. And remember, every name that's in here, there was at least 12 witnesses with DD5s, including several people here that were government cooperatives at the time. They were confidential informants that gave exactly who the players were that in that bar that night. So they knew exactly who the players were in that bar that night. So there was no secret because there's different DD5s. I have them all. That DD5 is a state police report. I have them. It's 12 different ones, eyewitness accounts, and they wrote down everybody that was in that bar, okay? So this says who's in the bar, okay? Were present at the Silver Fox Bar located on 101st Street and Liberty Avenue in Queens, New York. At some point, Tommy, last name unknown, okay, A.K. Elfie, approached Gotti Jr., who was seated. Elfie repeatedly bumped into him. Words were exchanged. One thing led to another, and Gotti Jr. ultimately hit Elfie with a broken glass bottle. Gotti Jr. then stabbed Elfie with a knife that Gotti Jr. had, okay? Now, remember, in this whole report, multiple people were stabbed. I was stabbed twice that night, okay? In my hand and my elbow, through my jacket, I was stabbed. Multiple people were stabbed. One guy died. In this whole report, I only put one knife in one person's hand. My own. Okay? Nobody else's. Okay? Nobody else's. I go on to say, okay, oh, and Elfie that I said was stabbed, the FBI grabbed him, interviewed him, took his clothes off and everything. He was never stabbed. He was never stabbed. So they knew he was never stabbed. So even my information was even accurate because it was all over the place. So they tried to piece together my notes, and they made a mess of my notes. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. What I was telling them, I was doubling back and going all over the place. They didn't even know how to formulate this the right way. Okay, they were all over the place. He was never stabbed. Okay. According to Gotti Jr., a melee ensued involving approximately 30 to 40 of the bar's patrons. Gotti Jr. recalled that among those involved in the fight and in fighting with Danny Silver were Angelo Castelli, Joe Curio. Now, here's where you're going to start having some problems now, right? Here's where the problem is. At the bar, in the beginning, in the first paragraph, it says I was at the bar with a girl named Donna. She doesn't exist. I said also at the bar was a guy named John Riley. He was involved in the fight. John Riley was the investigative detective that was investigating me for different crimes and all of us for crimes. I took the investigator and put him into the melee. I put him into the fight, okay? Angelo Castelli, who was dead at the time of the fight, Joe Curio, who died 3 years before the fight. How could they be at the fight if they were dead? Joe Curio died 3 years before the fight. How could he be at the fight? How could he be there?
Who's writing this?
I'm dictating a story. They're shorthand writing a story. 13 months later, you memorialize a report. You have dead people involved in a fight that would die. Joe Curio died in 1980. He was stabbed to death in a fight someplace else. This fight took place in 83. You have the investigating detective I have him at the bar in the fight. People who don't exist were there. I mean, you see where I'm going with this? It was absurd. It was completely and totally absurd. They knew this. Later on, more memorializations on different pages, I talked about my arrest, my case. We had a case called the Oak Point Dump case. And there was a cooperator on the case. His name was John Joe Zagari, right? They put it down that I'm talking about a guy named Joe Zingari. I never met Joe Zingari in my life. I don't even know who the guy is. If I met him, I couldn't tell him from a can of paint. So it was a complete nonsense mess. Saying something about an individual, that someone allowed something to happen. They changed the words that ordered something to happen. They conveniently. Most of the people, the players that you see here in this report, were either government cooperators or dead. So they knew exactly what I did. They knew exactly. They knew it. And again, it starts with that foundation from the very beginning, Pat. You're meeting with people. Before you go into this meeting, I was not obligated to tell one individual. Gravano told nobody. Any rat that goes to become a rat doesn't tell anybody. They sneak in the middle of the night like the rats that they are. They crawl out of their cell. They leave a note. Marshals come and get them and bring them over. I told 9 people. My co-defendants knew. Everybody knew I was going in. They knew exactly the tactic that I was going to employ. They knew ultimately I was going to go on the stand in my own defense. They knew it.
What happened afterwards?
I won the cases, thank God. That's what happened. But still to this day, you do have imbeciles. You have lowlifes. You have has-been cokehead jockeys, people like that want to blow these reports and think these are real reports. Name one individual, one. Here it is, today, openly challenge anyone. Show me a person that went to jail because of anything I've ever done in my life or said in my life. Show me. The guy who spent well over $10 million fighting the United States government. The guy who destroyed all their cooperators. Over a dozen men are home right now because of me. Because I destroyed these cooperators and they never used these cooperators ever again. Ever. Including the one you mentioned, John Alite. I was the last case. He gave a death penalty charge to a guy named Johnny Burke. Guess what? They used him to indict John Burke on a death penalty case, but never used John Alite to testify. I've never heard of that before in my life. That is unusual. Why? I retired him. I caught them in more wrongdoing. I caught the case agent in more wrongdoing, more misconduct. I pleaded over and over and over again for hearings on this issue. I could give you dates that I've asked for these hearings. Okay? Wrote letters, Attorney General Ashcroft. We can go on and on and on. I mean, you're talking about multiple letters to multiple different players and individuals. And here, they even had an article leaked to the paper that this was a scheme that I created. It called the Junior's Mob Exists scheme. They even talked about it. They fully knew.
Would your father have supported you going and having a meeting with those guys? Okay.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
What would he have said?
My father would have probably disowned me for helloing them. For sitting in a room with them? Absolutely not. But I was civilian. Again, I wasn't a hypocrite.
How long had you left before you had that meeting?
99, the tape you and I discussed, the meeting that you and I discussed.
26 years ago.
The last time I ever saw my father, first time I've touched him in years, last time I ever seen my father.
February 5th.
You saw him say, when I walked in the door, he walks in and says, Joseph said John wants closure. What do you think that meant?
Right.
We used it at trial. The jurors knew what it meant. I asked my father to be put on a shelf for life. I wanted to be a civilian.
So because for
and being a civilian entitled me to fight like a civilian.
This world you guys are in, words matter. technicalities, right?
Right.
So for you, John, is it the fact that you went and met with the feds because you were civilian and had left the life, you didn't feel guilty for meeting with them? Is that how you process it?
No, I didn't. And my plan was to go to trial. My plan was to help myself and help my co-defendants and beat the case. Okay, so it was an unorthodox tactic that I employed. But remember, I've involved a lot of people. There was a lot of communication, not according to me, according to their cooperators. There was a lot of communication, a lot of knowledge of what was going on here. Okay, different perspectives here. But one thing's for sure. Joe Messina at that time did not flip. He was probably one of the most powerful guys in New York at that moment. And I still showed respect and felt obligated. Okay? I showed respect and felt obligated. I sent word in to Joe. Joe flipped a short time later, but Joe knew the tactic that I was going to employ at some point in the case. He knew it. I think Joe, if I'm not mistaken, I think he flipped somewhere right around that time. But he knew my plan. 8-9 months earlier, he knew exactly what I wanted to do. It was told to Joe. He knew what I wanted to do. He had reservations about it, okay? And a man of his authority, I showed that respect to, I believe to be my elders, that in respect to my father's way of life, that even as a civilian, even from my civilian standpoint, my position in life, that I still gave them the respect to let them know what I'm doing, and I didn't want it to be misconceived.
Is the outcome of this conviction that I'm listening to you, the last 30, 40 minutes, is this because it's important to you to clear your rep that maybe some are calling you?
It absolutely is. It's probably one of the most important things to me.
Why is that? Because
when you went through what I went through, I spent easily, we showed the judge, we brought him, the fourth trial, it was a tax and parole violation case, okay? And I brought in and put a shoebox. When they were asking me about turning over records, and I said, Your Honor, they're going to use my records against me. Why should I turn them over? And then I brought a shoebox, a boot box actually, like this. I dumped it over on the table. It was neatly stacked checks totaling over $10 million. It would have cost me to defend myself. Does a rat spend $10 million fighting fucking multiple trials? Does a rat put his house in foreclosure? I came home to my house in foreclosure. I lost every business I had. My businesses were gone. My house that I live in right now was in foreclosure. I wrote the book, sold the rights to the movie to get that house out of foreclosure. Is that what a rat does? Show me one. Show me one rat. Show me one rat that went for the monies I went defending the government. Millions of dollars in legal defenses, subpoenaing their cooperators out of the program in hiding, hiring private investigators to do what I did. Show me one. And it's important to share something with you because here we have, forget about the misconduct, things that had taken place with us. It was off the charts, completely off the charts. And let me show you how easy it is also to confuse and doctor up documents, especially these 302s. It's been done multiple times. And you can see how wrong they got it, right? You're sitting here, you're a civilian, correct? Very educated, I believe. Very articulate individual. I'm impressed by you. I'm impressed by what you built. So I know appealing to someone like you, you'd be the perfect guy to analyze every single thing that I'm saying right now. You're the perfect guy. I couldn't find a better forum. I tried to do it with 60 Minutes. They didn't know how to do it. That was when I first came home from prison in 2010. But this was really like nobody even believed any of this garbage. But you, as we said earlier, 7 years you've been trying to get me here. You tried to get me here for 7 years.
Yep.
I said, I want to have a conversation with Pat. I want to have a conversation with him. I do want to have this conversation. It took 7 years to get us here, and here we are. So, and I knew you would do your homework because I want to talk about all of these things. And I want you to tell me, be the devil's advocate and say, this is where I think it's wrong or right or whatever have you. And I always would culminate by saying this. Show me an individual. You asked me a great question. Would your father approve? No. He wouldn't even shake their hand that day on the visit.
Yeah, obviously, I'm not in this world, but I got a call from Phil Leonetti one time. You know Phil Leonetti.
I've never met him. I don't know the guy. No.
But you know the name.
Yeah, I've heard the name.
Right.
I don't know the guy.
He calls me and We go to a nice Italian restaurant, and the next day we do
Right.
the interview. He asked me to cover his face, so it's not shown, and we talk
Why?
about
What does he cover his face for? What is he ashamed of?
because he he did some maybe surgeries that he didn't want his face to be seen
yeah?
or whatever it may have been.
Like Gravano
And
did?
he had stories that he said about Nicky Scarfo, right? And then we had Ralph Natali there, and then he told his stories.
Right.
Then we had Frank Collada, no longer with us, the late
Right.
Frank Collada. And he was part of the Spilatra crew, I believe. Oscar Goodman, great conversation.
Great lawyer.
Great
Oscar
lawyer.
Goodman's a great lawyer.
Yeah. Michael Francis, multiple sit-downs. Sammy DeBull, multiple.
Right.
And then eventually we did Mafia States of America. And you know what is common, like thread amongst everybody? And I think this goes credit to the life, which whatever the orientation is, when you're being indoctrinated in this world,
Right.
whatever that is, whoever explained the pain of Omerta, they did such a great job selling it.
Right.
Because it's like at this age, look, man, let me save face. Here's why I did. Here's why I did it. To the average person.
Right.
To the person that's not in this world, we're not in it. We're just watching and it's interesting stories. But there is this pride to say, this is why I had the meeting with feds. And what is consistent amongst everybody across the board,
Good.
none of them like him. They all are not fans of the government. And they all feel like the story has been told in a different way.
But they liked him when they were in the life, right? And they didn't feel the pain of the life when they were in the life. They felt the pain when they went to prison, I guess. I guess that nip, that pain hit them when they got to prison, right? Well, what pain should have I felt when they rolled me onto the death row unit? Should I have felt some pain? What do you think if I would have turned around and said, hey, guys, you got me. That's it. This is it. Uncle. Government says organized crime exists, right? They say there's entities in New York that control New York, right? Do you think that would have existed if the son of John Gotti became a rat? What damage do you think I could have done if I was a rat? What damage? The government said from 1990, my father went to prison, till I went to prison in 1998. They said I was the acting boss. What damage in that? Gravano was of driftwood in and out. They said I was the acting boss. What damage could I have done if that was all true? And so it is true. I was never any acting boss. I was the guy who held the door open for the boss. Okay, John Gotti was the boss always. I'm nobody.
Sammy said, once a mafioso, you're a mafioso for life.
Is he still a mafioso, he thinks?
Well, he says it's a lifestyle.
Selling
right?
drugs to little kids in Arizona, he's a mafioso? That's the mafia? He'll blame it on his son. Nice, how convenient. Well, guess what? I heard a lot of the wiretaps. Let's see. His son was coming to him and taking money off of him, and they're talking about a drug deal. That's how you encourage your kid? If you remember correctly, when Sammy Gravano first said he flipped, this is his very first time he said he flipped, did an interview. He said that he was in prison, he got to ponder the situation, he wanted to change his life, and he wanted to save his kid. He wanted to save his son. He wanted to save him from that lifestyle. That's what he said, right? I didn't say it, he said this. And yet, you come home after your rat, you got absolution for 19 murders, you got the deal of the century. You did less than 4 years. 19 bodies are in the street, 2 innocent people. Of that 19, 2 were stone cold innocent. One was a little boy, 16 years old, okay? You came home and you go into the narcotics business and sell drugs to little kids, and you bring your kid along and your wife and your daughter? That was your way of saving your son? Interesting. That's like me saying, Dad, put me on the shelf for life. I don't want to be in the life anymore. And the moment I get home, I tell my son, drive the car. I got to go kill somebody. I just told you, my son's grandkids were named John Gotti. What do you want to do, Dad? What do we do at the end here? When do we stop this? Does everybody have to go to jail? Everybody? All of us have to go to jail? Could we save them at least? So me giving that speech to a dying man, a man I adored, me giving him that speech, and then I go home after all of this, and I take my son, John Gotti, and his other grandson, John Gotti, and I go commit crimes with them. I lied right to a dying man's face, did I not?
Let me ask you.
That's what's akin to what he did, Gravano.
Because I think the only thing, and would you ever sit across with Sammy?
Never.
Tell me why.
I received a message from a lawyer from New Jersey. I think the message came from you, and please correct me if it wasn't. Years back.
Was lawyer's first name James?
It was.
Yeah.
And he said, I can get you $1 million, John, if you sit across the table from Gravano, and they're going to give him $500,000. And I said, not for $10 million, okay? Not for $10 million will I do it. I sit with that low life in the room. And again, I never knew him. He could have went home from prison and lived his life and done his thing. But when you try to take down someone like John, who did everything by the rule book, even I, as his son, okay, don't have the right to be angry at any aspect of my father. And believe me, there are some aspects. I don't have that right because the life that he chose and the life that I chose, that I walked away from, and the life that Gravano chose, the only one of those three in the equation that actually lived it in its totality was John Gotti. So how dare we even say anything negative about John Gotti? Me, I walked away. You ratted. You buried people and buried families. You don't have the right to take any of that, any of John's glory. That's called stolen honor, stolen glory. Stolen valor, they call it in the military. It's called stolen valor. You don't have the right to steal John's valor. I don't agree with John Gotti. I don't think John had it all right. I look at it from this perspective, okay? I think the streets, they destroy families. And I think most of the guys, many of the guys, not most, many of the guys in the streets, I think are cowards. You want to know why I think they're cowards? I'm going to tell you why. Because when you go to prison, you have to hang on the fact that you were in a group. I think most gangbangers are cowards. They got to belong to something, okay? Go to prison by yourself. Be a stand-up guy and go to jail by yourself and belong to nobody. Go to a penitentiary or go to a disciplinary 4 or some of those joints and be on your own. Get my respect. Then be a man. I fought the United States government without the entity the government calls the Gambino crime family behind me, or without belonging to the government. I fought them alone. My wife, my children, and my dear brothers that loved me. With no money at the end, no money. I hawked diamond watches to fight the government, and I fought them, and I beat them, and I'm home, and I retired a lot of their cooperators, and a lot of men are coming home now because of me, okay, because of me. And to answer your question, does that bother me? It certainly does. You have no right. But it doesn't bother me nearly as much because the people that matter know who I am is nearly as much as Gravano taking my father's valor. Like I said, that life to me, I'm 26 years removed. I'm not impressed anymore. I'm not impressed by them. You want to impress me, stand on your own 2 goddamn feet. John Gotti fought the government, but he had an army behind him. He certainly had a loyal son in his corner. He had an army behind him. And he was a folk hero throughout. I fought the United States government with limited reserves, no army behind me. I went to prison by myself. I did my time. I didn't walk around and say, hey, I'm John Gotti. I got the whole Gambino family behind me. I did it my own time. I did my bid. Okay? I did my time. So to answer your question, that angers me to have someone like a Gravano, that you took the punk way out, went to a punk prison, went to a punk unit in ADX, Colorado. ADX, Colorado is a serious place. It took over for Marion. Serious place. But he didn't do serious time. He went into a rat unit and did time with rats. That's what he did. Fellow rats. He wasn't with any men there because he wouldn't have made the bid. They would have ate him up.
John, first of all, James, if you're watching this, I never said $1.5 million. Why are you over negotiating?
No, he said $1 million for me and $500,000 for Gravano.
Don't count my money, James. I'm going to call James. We're going to have a conversation.
But if I may,
but this is what I was going to say to you. Here's what I was going to say to you. You said something about you're blue, independent. I've been a registered independent for 17 years. I like Clinton. I voted for him. I like Trump. I voted for him. I fought for him. I defended him. I think he's the right guy right now for America where we are. Love him or hate him. I don't care where you are. It's my position. Right. I'm not saying you love him or hate him. Right. I'm talking to the audience. But that's a part of it, why we have something in America which is fantastic, which is called debate. And the reason why I bring this up is if I'm watching, like the way I watch interviews, John, is when a conversation is taking place, I'm saying, ask this. Right. This is my question. Right. I'm the audience. Ask me the question I want to ask. The question I would ask is the following. I think the question fans will want to ask. If you're willing to meet with the feds for 40 minutes, why don't you meet with Sammy? By the way, Sammy also doesn't want to do it. I can't. I must be the worst negotiator in the world.
But here's the
because
thing.
I can't get neither side to anything. I should retire from sales and go sell, make some Starbucks or something.
Here's the answer to that question. Here's the answer
business
to that question.
stuff. I still can't figure out.
I was about to go to trial.
Yeah.
I had co-defendants. We were going to trial, going to war against the government. Okay, that was part of the tactic that I employed to meet with them to establish a foundation. With me going on the stand and testifying, They accused me of being the shot caller. I was the head of the indictment. I was the father. According to them, I was the father. This was the family, and I was the father of that family. I didn't send a sacrificial lamb to go along there. I didn't tell some. I was going to go on that stand myself. And believe me, it would have been a war. I'd have been sparring with the best. The U.S. attorneys would have been coming out with everything. And look, it would have gotten to a point. Charlie Canisi asked that question. You're going to be asked some sensitive questions about sensitive people. And I'm going to say, I don't have a rat deal here. I don't have one of those 5K1 letters. See, all these rats have what's called the most magic get-out-of-jail-free tickets. It's called a 5K1 letter. A 5K1 letter means you're a rat. It means you help the government out. They go in front of the judge, and they get you released from prison. I fought the United States government over and over and over again. I even was willing on the last case. I offered to take 20 years. So they stopped subpoenaing my sister. They subpoenaed my sister, Victoria. They subpoenaed all my witnesses, including my brother, Peter. They harassed my family. I told my lawyer, go in and tell them I'll take 20 right now. Just let this go. We're done. You know what the FBI agent in charge of the case said? Tell John that's not going to happen. We got him. That's what he said. You know what I did? When the verdict came down and finally the final letter came down after multiple Allen charges. You never heard of more than one Allen charge in any case. It's an explosion charge to get a verdict. This judge unethically did one unannounced and two announced, which already, those are reversible issues right there alone. 23 days of deliberations, 23 days, those people went to war and got me released on December 1. 15 years ago last week, I was released. December 1, okay? I was released from solitary confinement, released home to my family. And when they came over and told me, and the judge says, you have no other choice to give me bail, it was the fifth case in 37 months, what I did was, I got up. First, I had some emotions. I had some tears running down my face. Let's not forget that. It was very emotional. I was going home. Is this really over? Is this finally really over? The wars are over? As Bruce Cutler called them, the Gotti Wars, are they finally over? Okay? Got my composure, got up. The FBI agent was sitting over there. I looked at him, I walked past him, I stopped, I walked back. I said, how's that 20 years look now, motherfucker? And I walked out. Couldn't help myself. Should have taken the 20. You had me. I threw the towel in. That was my way of being a punk. My way of being a punk was taking the 20 years and quitting. And I was taking 20 years. Not a rat deal. Not one of those magic 5K1 get out of jail free cards like they all got. No. I was taking 20 years. Think about it. That case, I'm 60 years old. I'd be getting out in 2 more years. I'd be getting out. So right now, you and I wouldn't be talking. I'd be getting released in 2 years from now. Think about that for a second, okay? And I was willing to do that. That's what I was willing to do to make this all end, to make this pain stop, to make my mother's pain stop, make my wife's pain stop, make my siblings' pain stop, make my father's grandkids once and for all. Let's end this madness. This is crazy. I mean, the Gottis are the most tried family in history, and I'm the most tried Gotti. No Gotti tried more than me. None. You could look it up. Please, while we're here, did we get that stat yet? Because 37 months, stop to start, 5 federal proceedings, never been done before, ever. Donald Trump. You voted for Donald, right? Okay, how many cases did he get? Some were civil, I think 1 civil, 2 criminal, then 1 state case on top of that, right?
Man,
4 in total?
Seems like he got a ton of them. I don't know what the number is.
Guess who got more than Donald Trump? Me. Guess who has $1 billion? Him. Guess who now has absolution? Him. Guess who had to fight his way out? Me.
34 charges.
Oh, I eclipsed those 34 charges. If you take my indictments and stack them all up, 34 charges.
John, you may want to run.
You got to go into 150, 200 charges for crime.
You're running for office 28, then.
Listen, I got charged, Pat, I got charged with a murder. I got charged in Pinellas County, Florida. A federal judge sent me back home to New York to be tried because he didn't want nothing to do with the case. He knew I didn't belong there. He said, this man beat you 4 times and you're going to dump him on me? Oh, hell no. He could have dismissed it. He didn't. He sent it back to New York. I got charged with a murder in Tampa, Florida. I'd never been to Tampa in my life. I couldn't find Tampa with a goddamn map. The first time I ever arrived in Tampa, Florida was in handcuffs. They had a massive press conference. I believe the U.S. Attorney's name was O'Neill. 20 agents up there.
You've never been there?
Never been to Tampa. Excuse me. In my life. Never been to Tampa in my life. That was the first time in handcuffs and shackles with a helicopter over me, 20 guards around me bringing me into the prison. And I'm saying, basically, when my lawyer, famed Henry Gonzalez, speaking of RICO, he's one of the first lawyers to spar with Robert Blakey, who created the RICO law. Henry Gonzalez, the late, great Henry Gonzalez, dear friend of mine, and I love the guy, I miss him. He came to see me. Friend of my dad's, friend of Neil Delacroce. And he says, how are you, John? I says, Henry, what am I doing here? He says, well, you're about to fight a RICO case. I says, I've never been to Tampa in my life. He says, well, they say otherwise. And I was there. But before we forget, Pat, and I know where you want to close with, I want to just read something. I got two things I want to read to you very quickly, okay? And you give me, again, I'm going to ask you for an opinion. And I admire honesty. I truly do. I truly do. Oh, and I didn't continue. With the Gravano, I would never meet with Gravano, with the government, because that was a tactic we were employing to fight a case. I was employing the tactic to fight a case. Everybody knew I was going in, okay? I was a civilian, so I was able to fight the case different than the next guy. But I want to read something to you. These are the letters that I had sent, me personally, endorsed by my counsel, but I personally had typed them up, had them type them up. I don't know how to type, but I had written myself personally to the following individuals, asking for an open hearing on misconduct against me, as well as this rat charge against me. Now, does this sound like somebody has something to hide? Here I am. Attorney Generals of the U.S. Attorney. Okay. I had written Attorney General Michael Mukasey on 3/10/08. Got no response back. I had written Attorney General Eric Holder on 7/13/09. Got no response back. I had written to U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara twice, one in January 28/15 and the other in 2014. No response. And I had written to U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions on 4/17/2017. Okay? And I got a letter back saying, thank you, friend, for your letter, and we're going to consider this. Well, here we are 7 years later. I still haven't heard back from anybody. So, is this a guy who gives you any impression that he's got something to hide? Now, remind you also, letters asking for hearings. Then I asked my trial judge, Shira Shinlin, for a hearing on April 2006. I asked for this in open court about this issue and the leaks to the press and everything else, and what they were trying to create, this aura around me. And basically, I asked for it. We asked for the hearing in April 2006, as well as in August again in 2006. And both times it was turned down. I asked for the hearing from my trial judge, Kevin Castell, on 11/11/09. And again, in the summer of 2009. We asked Eli Honig, the prosecutor. We asked him for the demand for the file on the lead FBI agent there. Again, nobody's ever complied. Now, I've got a tremendous amount of respect for Eli Honig. He was an amazing prosecutor. And I got to tell you, of all the prosecutors that I faced in my life, I think between state and federal, I know in federal I faced 17 prosecutors or U.S. attorneys. And I think we have a couple of the state. I think we go into like 22 or 23. Eli Honig was a very professional prosecutor. He was good at what he did. I don't believe he ever even wanted the case. When we won the motion in Tampa, Florida, that case was dumped on his lap. The team in Tampa, Florida came over to New York. So now I had to fight two different agencies. I had to fight the Middle District of Tampa, and I had the Middle District of Florida, which is Tampa. I think it's the 11th Circuit. And I had to fight the Southern District of New York, which was Eli Honig, was the AUSA in that case. I had to fight both of them. Eli Honig had written a book. Okay, and again, I'm trying to be expeditious here. He had written a book, and in the book that he had written, he talks about the case agent on my case. And again, I guess this may be a case of how you guys are going to edit this, but again, I'm just trying to get all this content in because it's essential to make my case. Okay? Just goes to show you about the 302, how it works out, how it's dictated, how in my particular case, 13 months later, a report was garnished a report 13 months later. How ridiculous it is. There's dead people in a bar fight that could not have been there. The investigative detective was in the bar fight. Look, you're the greatest crime-fighting agency in the world. So you say, right? The FBI? They did say that at one time, and I believe, there are some bad apples, but I do believe the technology that they probably are the greatest crime-fighting agency in the world. You're telling me a select few decided to overlook some of these things or not even to bother to research this? Who's Riley? Who's Joe Curio? Dead man at a bar fight? Nobody chose to look at that? Okay, I'll go along with that. But let me show you why I end up at that point. Here's Eli Honig, and again, a respected AUSA, and I have respect for him as a AUSA because he fought the case, I believe, as fair as he possibly could with his hands tied to a point. Okay? He talks about the agent on my case, and when he talks about him, he says he was obsessed with a certain particular murder. He was brilliant. He's brilliant, incorrigible, relentless, FBI special agent with the Queens-based Gambino squad. He had investigated and solved plenty of mob cases over his career, often deploying unorthodox techniques. Now pay attention to this one. He once typed up pages of phony transcripts of a wiretap that didn't exist, put them into a binder, and showed them to a Gambino soldier to try to convince him that we had him dead on wiretapping to try to make him into a rat, to flip him. Now, is that ethical? Put false documents out to try to flip somebody, to tell them they're going to get killed if they don't? Well, this is he's, with humor, he's openly talking about this. I mean, I couldn't help by reading this. I read it over and over again, and I read it again, and I read it again, and I said to myself, did he say this? Because this ain't funny. This is misconduct. It's everything I've been saying that this particular agent did. It's misconduct. You're doctoring up documents. It's misconduct. That's not by the rule book. You're the FBI. You are holier than thou. The rules that pertain to you are supposed to be a higher standard. I guess not. I guess not.
You would have made a great lawyer, John.
Yeah, I would have tried. I should have.
And I'm actually being serious. You would have made a great lawyer. Some of that IQ passed over to you. I mean, you got to take some credit.
Thank you. I'm not a pimple on my father's ass. I promise you.
No, I'm just telling you. Just listening to you make the case. It's very impressive how you communicate. I think there's a few things that's been my takeaway from this. I go home tonight. My wife's going to say, "Babe, how was the conversation with John Gotti Jr.?" I'm going to say, "Babe."
Actually, I'm John A.
John A. Right.
Yeah, my father's Junior. People don't know that, but he's Junior. My father's John Gotti. My father's Junior.
I didn't know that.
My father's siblings all called him Junior. Nobody called him Johnny.
I didn't know that.
They all called him Junior. I'm the third, technically, and my son John's the fourth, and somehow it got confused.
I thought he was the third.
It got confused.
Oh, okay.
So I'm John A, the third, and my son John Gotti is the fourth, but for his boxing promotion, they made him the third.
Yeah.
And they made me Junior, and the media made me Junior as well. Because it had a better ring to it.
My wife always asks me, she says, "Babe, we were doing election night podcast, and I went 8 hours straight sitting down with 2,000 people in front of me. Not once I went to the bathroom. John, I have so much respect for you.
I appreciate it.
You've not gone to the restroom one time yet. No. We've been going through this entire conversation
for another 2-3 hours.
Your fire is incredible.
Yeah.
Just listening to these
not
stories.
Bad for a 60-year-old man.
But that's why I said when I looked at you when you walked in, I'm like, yeah. John, you look good.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming out, this conversation. I hope we'll do a couple more in the future as well. On your flight back, just consider on if we were to do a sit down together with pray about it, because Sammy's found God. When you hear Sammy,
I couldn't have respect for my father. I would never even be in the room with the guy. I couldn't do it. Listen, look. I don't know, but I do know. Sammy Gravano can't go back to the old neighborhood. He can't. He can pretend to. He can sneak in, like the rest of these rats do. I eat in the restaurants I've always eaten in my whole life. Could I eat in those restaurants and go to those places if I would sit in a room with someone like a Sam Gravano? No. And I still have, again, I'm 26 years removed from that life. I'm a civilian. I'm proud of my position where I am right now. I'm proud of my accomplishments. However, when I watch the movies, I still root for a certain kind of a bad guy. I always do. It's in my heart. It is in my heart. And there's individuals that I left behind in that life, and there's individuals I left in prison that every holiday I get very sentimental about, especially the fellows in prison. Believe me, I always have a drink alone before I start to do anything on any holiday. I have it alone for them. And then I always have one again at the end of the night for them. Respect for my brothers that I left in prison, my cellmate who was doing Life Plus, and other individuals. I always do. That's who I am. I could never be in a room with a guy like that who put so many people in prison, destroyed so many families. Look, in my book, I talk about the necessity of certain things in life. And in a civilized society, we need strong law enforcement. We need them. We need a non-corrupt FBI. We need that. We need it. It's essential to survive. We need it. We need great investigative tools to give us the freedoms that we enjoy in this society. We need all of that. And you want to know something? To make certain cases, I guess you need cooperators. You do. Donald Trump saying flipping should be illegal, I don't agree. What I disagree, what he should have said, and again, saying what you were saying, that certain things, certain questions should be asked. When I watch Donald Trump talk at times, I'm like this. Oh, he's going to answer this just like, and he frustrates me. He frustrates me. And he's a likable guy, but he frustrates me in some respects. But I say to myself all the time, I said, cooperators, I guess they are somewhat a necessity to a point. Here's the problem. Most federal judges do not know that when they go in front of them with that magic letter, that 5K letter, that's magic, they go with that letter, and they say what great assistance he gave to us and so on and so forth, and they reduce the sentence and release them immediately. They believe that they were releasing this person to the witness protection program under the strict supervision of both the FBI and the U.S. Marshal Service. They believe that's happening. They do. They don't know that at any time, if life gets a little tricky, and the Marshal Service, they are stringent. When you're in their program, they want you to work. You're supposed to be gainfully employed. They get you a car, they give you a budget to live, but they want you to get a job, and they want to make sure you're paying your taxes and yada, yada, yada. Most of these witnesses aren't going to adhere to those rules, so what do? They just sign themselves out, and they're in the wind. Now, if a judge knew that you have the ability at any time, you were dangerous yesterday. You did 19 murders, 20 murders, you held without bail, the U.S. Attorney's Office felt you were so dangerous, you should never be released because this guy did a murder, he did this. Then all of a sudden, now he cooperated, he's less dangerous? With a new identity? That nobody knows who he is or where he's at? I leave here right now, people know I'm John Gotti. That's who I am. If I go take a rock and break your window, you're going to see me, John Gotti broke that window. There it is. These guys have new identities, new driver's license, new everything. So that's why nobody could police these individuals. You think it's okay to release them into somebody else's community, okay, unwatched, unpoliced, and judges don't know this. Most federal judges aren't aware of this. They think that I'm releasing them, and the individual is going to go into the program, and if he does one thing wrong, he comes right back here. No. If he does anything wrong, that's it. There's no more time. He's done. Gravano said on the stand, he said, if I tell a lie, I'll do the rest of my life in jail. I'll tear up my agreement. Okay? That's what he said. He said it over and over again. Well, he got caught selling narcotics to kids, right? And the only reason why the federal government gave him a 20-year sentence is because Arizona already gave him that sentence. And that's like you turning around and saying that, we're going to do it too. He's not going to do any more time. He's going to do the time. Only the difference is he's going to do it in a federal protected unit, not in some state unit in Arizona where maybe he'd be more vulnerable. It'd be a little tough at that time for him. Instead, he went to a federal protected unit, okay? And the federal government mirrored the sentence. He got no additional time. None at all. Now, what happened to the life without parole? What happened to you being made accountable for 19 murders? What happened to all of that? What happened to it? You've just now violated. People are rotting in jail. People died in prison. Most of those guys he testified against already died in prison. They died in prison already, including my father. My father died a horrible death, handcuffed to a bed alone in solitary confinement, alone. Read his death certificate. You know what it says? His death certificate says he choked on his own vomit and blood. That's how my father died. Everything was rotted in his throat. He had nothing left. The pain that this man was going through, handcuffed to a fucking bed, was unbearable. And he choked on his own vomit and blood. Never said uncle. Never. Walked it all the way to the gate. Valor. Whether you respect the choices he made in his life or not, whether you respect what he was in his life, criminal, not whatever he was, he still believed in what he was, and he walked it all the way to the gate. Gravano did not do that. He does not have that right. He does not have that right. And getting back to what I said, if a federal judge knew these particulars, I believe, make them accountable. Yeah, let them become a rat. Let them go into the program. Do whatever you're going to do. And once your time, if you commit any violations, you have to go back in front of that judge. And that judge can now bring it all home. He can give you all that time. He can send it right up your backside.
John, I'm going to get a lot of weird phone calls when this thing goes live. And they're going to be interesting phone calls. But regardless of it, I really enjoyed speaking with you. I appreciate you for coming out. And I wish you had 5 more hours to sit down and talk to me.
As do I.
You really enjoyed this. Thank you.
I'm just getting started.
But I appreciate you for coming up, man. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for this. Absolutely. I'm sure.
I appreciate your hospitality.
Anytime. And at the end of the day, you know who wins with these types of conversations? The audience wins.
Well, the
audience hears it. And for you, you get to tell because you don't do a lot of this stuff. I don't see a lot of stuff with you.
I'm not into it. Look, not to interrupt you again. Yeah. I thought the opportunity was here, and I know I know you're pretty astute at what you do. That being said, I figured, you know what? I would like him to police me. I want someone to police me. If I'm misrepresenting anything, police me and show me I'm wrong. Got fact checkers right here. Show me I'm wrong. Take me to task and let me explain it. If I'm not expressing it properly, take me to task. Let me express myself properly. If I'm not, take me to task and let me explain that situation. And one more thing. Again, gracious host, you offered to fly me out here, right? First class. Food, per diem, hotel rooms, the whole 9 yards, right?
Sure.
I refused it. I told you, donate it to cancer. Donate it to Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. I'll get here on my own. I'm sure Gravano didn't make the same expression to you. I'm sure he didn't do that. I'm sure Gravano didn't do that. I'm sure. Because everything is about money to people like him. Everything's about money to him, okay? Let's see how many of his victims he's going to return some of that money back to. Let's see. Let's just see. Let's take a shot. He's working on a lot of stuff going on right now, right? I'm sure maybe they could infiltrate his bank account in England. That bank account he has in England.
Your birthday is your Valentine's Day?
Yeah, 2/14/64 is my birth.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. And you had no aspirations of wanting to be a lawyer? Like
no.
That never crossed?
I wanted to be a soldier. I graduated military academy.
You wanted to be a soldier?
I was captain of the boxing team. I played football.
Did you always communicate this well?
No. I'm one of the God's honest truth. I'm very shy, number one. Number two, my father was a tremendous orator. In a room with individuals, he could hold court. I'd love to defer. I just never really had that ability, number one. Number two, for the most part, especially around women, I'm very shy. I'm a very shy guy. So my comfort level is my wife. My comfort level is people that I'm comfortable with. It's my comfort level. But if I have a point that I believe that I need to articulate, okay, you could overcome certain things, certain anxieties you could overcome in the process of articulating those views when you feel a necessity that they have to come out. And especially, screw me, I'm here. Tonight, I'm going to eat in a wonderful restaurant down here, 388. Dear friend of mine, I raised the kid, he's a wonderful guy. I'm going to have an amazing meal. And I'm just me. I'm a regular guy. That's my father's son. I'm not special. My father was special. You don't have to agree. Nobody has to agree. But if they knew my father, they'd understand, because everybody cements that portion of history. Donald Trump, for what he's accomplished, the cases and what was going on back and forth there, and then to become the president of the United States. I mean, look, I'm not a doubting Thomas. I'm really not. But if you would have told me a year ago he's going to win, I told you, you done lost your mind. They've made it where he cannot win. And I was expecting him at some point, and I underestimated his character. I thought he was going to throw the towel in at some point. I thought there were going to be back-channel conversations going on with the Biden regime, And what they were going to do, is my belief, I thought that what they were going to do was this. Look, if I do win, I'm going to pardon your kid and anybody else in your family. If I don't, you win, pardon me. Let's have a back channel negotiation here. I believed that was going to be put in place, and I believed it right up until 6 weeks ago. I believed it. I truly did. But I still didn't believe he had any shot of winning. And I seen the enormous amount of money that Team Harris had put out there. I think well over $1 billion. I know that. I says, wow, the way they're saturating the media and the way the mainstream media, 93% of them are basically against Trump, I said, I don't think he has any possibility because, and not to be insulting to anyone, I'm not trying to be insulting or demeaning in any way, shape, or form, but the vast majority of people are sheep. They really need to be led. They really do. They look for someone as a father figure, or they look for a voice to tell them, to advise them, to guide them. They do. And I believe that all the stuff, you're incorporating the Oprah Winfreys and the Beyoncés and all that stuff, and I'm saying they're going to win over people in a nice way. A sheep are going to be evolved, and they're going to be won over and just led along. Donald Trump's the boogeyman and all these other things that's going to go on. And I believed he had no shot of winning this election. So that being said, I look at it and say he cemented his place in history. Like him or not, doesn't even really matter, okay? Whether I like him or not, doesn't even matter. It means that he cemented his place in history because he overcame insurmountable odds. Yeah. And even the assassination attempt, the turn at that perfect moment. I mean, look, call it God's guiding hand, whatever you want. He cemented his place in history. I believe Nelson Mandela, he cemented his place in history forever and ever. And again, what I'm explaining to you, take it in different ways. Don't take it, because I'm about to say the name John Gotti. Don't say, hey, how dare you put the name John Gotti with Nelson Mandela. Look, Nelson Mandela had a curiosity about John Gotti as well. Nelson Mandela asked Charles Ogletree, when he went to go see my father multiple times in Marion, Illinois, what's he like? How is his mannerisms? How is it over there in Marion, Illinois? So he had a curiosity about John Gotti. Nelson Mandela, the most recognizable face and name in the world at his time, had curiosities about John Gotti as well. So John Gotti cemented himself in history. Al Capone today, well, John Gotti 100 years from now is going to surpass it all. He's never going to drop. He's always going to be synonymous, unfortunately, maybe, with organized crime. It's always going to be. So it's one of those situations.
Well, every father prays and hopes their son admired them and loved them as much as you love your father. And that's great to watch. Sincerely. That's great to watch.
I do. And you know what, Pat, in closing, I said this to my son who was the fighter, my son John. And before he was going to fight, he was fighting Floyd Mayweather. He fought Floyd Mayweather in August in Mexico. And I says, John, look, this is your time. You can do amazing things. Even though it was an exhibition, I said, you could do amazing things, John. I said, you could do amazing things here. I says, nobody's saying go out there and be reckless and try to hurt him. It's an exhibition, but you could do amazing things. And just think about this. When this is all said and done, you get to sit here and share this moment with me, and I get to share this moment with you. I hope you cherish it because I cherish it. Because you know something, John? If someone right now gave me a scissor and told me to cut off my pinky finger right now so I could have 1 hour of unguarded, no wiretaps, nobody listening, nobody watching, and have a conversation with my father, 1 hour, have a cigar and a martini, 1 hour, the old John, the healthy John Gotti, free, 1 hour, just leave us be. Leave us be. Let us say what a father and son would want to say. Let us get emotional. Let me cry. He won't. He's too tough. I'm not. Let us embrace. And then go back to the way it was. I would take my finger off tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning I would do it.
And let me tell you, that love is felt. It's like so amazing watching your loyalty and love for your pops.
Thank you.
That's great to see. John?
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Enjoyed this.
Thank you for the audience.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the audience.
Anytime. Thank you.